Okay. There we are. Now I have my microphone. Okay, cool. Great. So that's what that sound is. Okay, great. Now I'm going to be reviewing some Groypers, some more Groyper Fest. Let me see if I can change my title. TPUSA. TPUSA and Trump Jr. So what we saw is that recently Groypers have invaded or invited themselves in to another TPUSA event. This one was to help Donald Trump Jr., who is publishing a book, and so you had some Groypers who wanted to ask questions to Charlie Kirk, who was at the TPUSA Q&A, and apparently a Groyper has recorded the whole thing. So.
New book triggered at a Turning Point USA event at UCLA. Let's go ahead and listen in.
That's pretty good, guys. Good. So welcome to UCLA, Don. It's going around the country with your new book, Triggered, doing quite well. And how well did Don do on The View, by the way? Did he not do great? Okay, guys, what the hell are you guys watching The View for? Come on. Seriously? Okay. And Kimberly, of course.
So far, just things looking a bit rowdy. Oh, apparently Mike is in the Discord. Can you hear me now, Mike? Maybe he's not at the keyboard. Whatever. Let's continue.
Really well. So, Don, tell us about it. I mean, they asked you how many questions about your book? 0. But they brought you on to talk about your book. Correct. Now, that's sort of, I guess, while I didn't get to talk about the book itself, the title was sort of exemplary of exactly what happened, right? I mean, I get it. I'm a big boy. I expect some tough questions. I expect them to hit me. It's not like, you don't see the sound bites basically every day for the last few years. So, I don't expect that. But if you do say, hey, we want you on for 3 segments on our 5,000th episode, to talk about the book, you'd think you'd at least get one question in about the book. Like, I didn't go in there to be a punching bag, understanding that I was going to take some hits. And it's just sort of exemplary of what's going on, from that part of the left, where it's called The View, but you're only allowed to have one view.
Oh, no. Yes. And the funny thing...
So far, just pretty milquetoast with a little bit of Groyper energy, perhaps, in the grandstands.
Is, we were asked to go on. There's maybe 1 segment, 2 segments. It turned into 3 segments. It was okay. They're going to get to the books. We replied. We were nice. I was like, all right. Don was like, very, very well behaved. But when you go to someone's house, you would expect that they would greet you and use your name, right? And they didn't want to use our name. They didn't want to use his name. They're refusing to say it. It was that type of thing. But we rolled with it because we'll take the fight, and especially this guy anywhere. Because if we're asking people to stand for America...
All right, let's see where the action heats up.
People like, man, have you ever thought about writing this down? And I'd heard it, Don, you should do a business
Haven't seen much of Trump Jr. before this.
book. I'm like, honestly, I'm the son of a guy
Not that he hasn't been doing stuff, but I just haven't heard him.
who's written the business book, right? I don't need to do that.
That said, in terms of business, they were focusing on paying off debts currently.
Sorry, speak again?
I read in a magazine article that currently the Trump children are focusing on paying off the debts for their businesses.
Oh, they're having some financial problems, echoing their daddy, doing the same sort of leveraging.
I don't think it's problems. It's just sort of keeping it on the down low instead of focusing on acquisitions.
Yeah. It does seem like a family that lives fairly dangerously.
You hear that enough times, and you tell enough sort of fascinating stories, and you realize, there's something there, and so I did it, and it's been an awesome experience. It was great to sort of be able to take my Twitter feed and put it into long form, where you can sort of explain. It doesn't just have to be a bomb; you can actually explain it too, and it's been a lot of fun.
Well, you need more characters.
Yeah, and well, Don puts in the book a lot of different things. You talk about, you mentioned this earlier, social media banning, and also you have a whole chapter dedicated to the Jussie Smollett hoax. So I stopped. Again, people are holding up the book. Everyone should check it out. I was looking through it. I said, my goodness, a whole chapter to Jussie Smollett. Tell us, Don, a little about that. Well, listen, I was one of the first guys to really start, meaning the first guys with a platform, with something to lose, someone who's going to get attacked, and there's an opportunity cost of that attack, right? Because, you take on that
So far we
mainstream
just see
media,
basically.
there's consequences.
Let's see if we can get to Q&A or the anti-Q&A, as it were.
Question against an absurd fact set anymore without being racist, a misogynist, a homophobe. Get arrested for beating people over the head with a bike lock? Yeah, but I know I was scared because I was being questioned by a military officer, and those experiences shaped my life. I can assure you, waiting in line.
Hey, Eternal Fisherman. Hey, Chief Crow. Good to see y'all here.
For bread, I've done it. I wasn't a helicopter parent generation. My grandfather's like, you're going to the store, you go wait. And going to a supermarket that's empty is less than awesome.
I think it might only be at the end that we have some drama here.
Bernie would have you believe,
Let's
okay?
see.
Son took 1.5 billion. I get it, buddy. You're on the payroll. It's okay. But at least be honest about it, okay? It's for Hispanics, for females.
1,800
There's no mention of that. All-time low unemployment for those same demographics. No mention of that.
Oh yeah, people were really upset about this, or they generally get pretty upset when people mention unemployment statistics of women and minorities. They're like, oh, you're not focusing on the heartland, you're not focusing on the core American population, and they use stronger terms than that. But it seems to me like fairly standard just politicking. You emphasize the bright spots, you don't emphasize the spots that aren't so great. And you depend on the entire country to get elected. You don't just depend on white people to get elected. So it seems like of the sort of things that politicians do, this is one of the more benign of them. Half Galician says Trump Jr. is grifting a book. For sure he is. For sure he is.
In the last debate, the Democrats spent more time talking about Donald Trump's Twitter account than they did about China. Okay, Joe Biden goes around talking that China's not a threat. Well, Joe, China's not a threat when your son took 1.5 billion. I get it, but campuses every single day. Thank you guys. Some of you face to face.
By the way, congratulations. Under President Trump, college students in America will have a job when they...
Yeah, there's some heckling going on there you can hear in the background. Eternal Fisherman asks, why does the Luke Ford show end and start earlier now? I think like the weekend shows are non-standard. There's no standard time for them to start and end. And then also this past Friday, it had to be early for some reason. But I think the standard time is unchanged. But you'll see in future shows how that goes. Let's see. Trying to figure out where this drama is.
Graduate, even people like that.
Well, guys, for those of you who want to come to the book signing, we're going to go over do that. I look forward to meeting you guys, some of you face to face.
That I would like to see.
And it's awesome to be able to be out here. Thank you very much, and thank you all for exercising your free speech. Keep fighting on your campuses every single day. Thank you guys.
Okay, so now they're yelling or they're booing.
All right, that was Donald Trump Jr. speaking at a Turning Point USA event at UCLA. He was talking about his new book, Triggered, and he also talked about his recent appearance on The View. Now, you heard...
Okay, so this is not going to actually show that stuff. So let me see if I can find it. Let's see, searching Twitter. Here we go. Maybe this is going to be better.
Kylin!
Yeah, they're just mad about not getting a Q&A. I saw some spicier clips earlier, but let's see, Columbia Bugle has some things to say.
We're willing to listen. We're willing to listen.
I didn't see this part. And then someone made a comment in response to this, like saying that basically everyone who gets in between the protesters and the mic are gonna get whacked by these folks. Like, yeah, guys, be nice to Don Jr. Yeah, I don't know. It seems relatively self-destructive to start this this fight with Trump's child, you know. But there you go. Half Galician says, I don't think politics is served by so many people doing politics full time. It's not what citizen government aspires to. In fact, I would say almost the opposite. I think that the fact that politicians, it would be nice if politicians were given more time and money to do the actual job that they're supposed to do. I think that, you know, if it were up to me, then terms in the legislature would probably be 15 years and non-consecutive. So you couldn't get elected twice. So there would be no re-election campaign. You just get a long term. You serve that term, then you're done. And that would be, in my opinion, a lot better than what we have now, where politicians are always myopically focused on a few inches in front of their face for the next campaign season. And that it seems to me is a very bad system. It just ends up, creating creatures of the election who are just adapted for winning elections, not adapted for the work of governance. Afghanistan says, my proposal is 2 Senate terms and 6 House terms, each being 12 years. Yeah, that sounds like a move in the right direction. Definitely. By the way, folks, my Discord is here. You can join. Yeah, here we are. Posting it in the chat. And then going like that. Yeah. People can join the stream, and they can chat whenever they want. So Starman, do you have any thoughts on the on the Groyper TPUSA thing?
I'm not fully aware of what the Groyper versus the TPUSA issue was about. Is it that they weren't doing a Q&A session?
Yeah. Well, this latest one was that. This latest one was that there had been all these Q&As, and so I think the first one was a TPUSA event where the whole lineup was people who were basically Fuentes fans, and then Ben Shapiro had a debate, or not a debate, he rather had a speech, and the Q&A didn't have any Fuentes fans in it, despite the fact that they really wanted to be there. And then this latest one, they just canceled the Q&A altogether, so there was no Q&A at this latest TPUSA event. That seems to be their response to the Groypers.
I mean, if you paid for a ticket that promised and didn't get that, that'd be pretty annoying. But besides that, I don't think that's really a serious issue. These people probably don't want to do these Q&As at all, so why force them to?
Yeah. I mean, it seems to me it would be the best option is to engage productively, and then after that, I guess their only option is to disengage. It seems like they don't feel confident, basically, and you can't really blame them. It's hard in this context where you have people who are preparing a series of questions. Then you have to respond. You don't know what the questions are going to be. That's the case for every Q&A, but when you have a organized faction behind it that has multiple people all spearheading the same point, at that point it can become difficult. So I understand why they disengaged, although I don't think that it was necessarily the best move. Oh, let's see about this. Church of Entropy is streaming.
Topics you want to talk about, or you want to give your weekend reviews. And I know Gandalf made a stream, and you did some streams.
Ooh, a lot of multiple truths to parse through there. I guess I can quickly give my weekend review. It's been a really exciting recently for me, especially since you know, I stopped fighting with Brundlefly. That was like a big relief for me. And then things have just been getting like exponentially better since then. So I feel like I can get deeper into the creative process. Like I kind of been freed up a little bit. So
There's a little tidbit of Lucosphere drama. Apparently, Brundlefly and COE have buried the hatchet.
dropping
Welcome
some more
news.
clips. Really enjoying that. I dropped the clip of me contrasting the Aryan Kang and autistic Jewish Spurgouts there. So thanks, David, for illuminating that meme. I thought it was interesting. Hey, Kyle Rowland is in the chat. What's up, Kyle? We got to get Kyle on. You guys want to say hi to Kyle for Week in Review?
Yeah. Let's do Kyle first, but let's get to Josh.
You could put Kyle on. I'm sure he has comments on the doxing of Josh Neal, and I don't know if you guys have comment on there. I think that's something related, or maybe maybe he'll come on and he'll embrace it. He'll be like, "Yes, this is who I am. I'm not embarrassed," or who knows what's going to happen. But I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Well, I was still trying to give my Week in Review, but I got interrupted halfway through because I was fanboying for Kyle in the chat. But yeah, Kyle, I sent you the link. You can join anytime.
All right, cool. I got the link. Let's check to see if I'm not leaking anything. Hopefully I'm not. All right.
So I think I think what he wants is for us to like kind of persuade him because he's kind of like, I don't want to say girly, but you know what I mean?
He was on Judas Fly Star or whatever, and like Brundle emailed, like twittered me a link and told me like join my show, and I popped on the link, but it was Judas's, and I guess Brundle's like appearing on and trying to promote his channel, but Conops was there, and he was just out of control about like Claire and something that she said, and it was kind of like Eke or something like Muslims, like God forbid, just saying like horrible things. And just like, why do those words got to keep on leaving his mouth? But he's like, no, we must talk about this. And, it seemed related to like trying to clarify something that someone had said on Claire's stream.
I don't mean to interrupt.
But it was random that was on Judas's channel that Brundle is, taking, promoting him now from Claire, and Conops would, be on his stream for hours too.
David, I need to take a quick 5-minute break because my dog is begging to go out. She hasn't been out in 5 hours. I just wanted to get a point because like, I know all that drama. We worked on Claire's stream just like an hour or two ago. Conops was taking an emotional reaction to a point that you didn't need to take an emotional reaction to. You just needed to look at the argument, the scenario being laid out, and his freak out was actually the bigger problem than anything Claire did or anybody else in the panel did.
Hey folks, hate to interrupt. Just want to ask Jen, am I okay to restream this Hangout?
Oh, absolutely, Kyle. Thank you so much for asking.
Oh, excellent.
Sure.
Great.
Yeah. I want to say Kyle got, I think it's over 500 views on that stream. So good job, man. That was
apparently
great.
over 600. Moving on up.
Ooh.
I guess it was the Fuentes factor, or the just the drama got attention.
Thanks, Conops. Come on, Conops. You gotta let me post that video. He doesn't want me to post clips of him unless it's a shit stream, basically. Because your conversation.
Really?
It was
Conops objects to you posting videos of. Oh, but maybe it's not live streamed. Is that why?
Well, the video I asked you if I could clip, and you said yes. The reason I haven't put it public yet is because he's being a queen about it.
Oh, yeah. But I suppose isn't it my IP if I streamed it? But whatever. Yeah, I mean, if you can do whatever you want with Conops at this point. I wouldn't want to piss him off, but yeah. I'm surprised that he objects to him being clipped, or he being clipped out of a live stream, no less, that's already online.
I think he just wants us to be like, please, Conops, please. He's like that, a little.
But what happened with Conops drama? I'm always interested in Conops drama. I had a tiny bit of a spat with him on my live stream. It was really minor, but there were a little bit of sparks there. Did more fly later on?
There was no Conops drama. He just loves drama so much. Basically, I think it boils down to he doesn't want me to drop this clip video because it's not enough drama.
Oh, yeah.
So that's the drama, basically.
I see.
Not enough drama. Yeah, I know.
He's got a pretty limited range of topics that he's conversant in, and sometimes those topics are a little lewd, and he'll just harp on them for long periods of times. But like, he's got a few topics that he's pretty knowledgeable about, and could go on and on.
Did you see Kyle's stream with him? Because it was actually pretty interesting. Those two together is pretty magical.
No, I wasn't able to catch it. There were so many streams, and I was just looking. I could see like he didn't timestamp it or it wasn't topical, and so it's just too much to keep up with. All the tens of hours, hundreds of hours that people are streaming each week. But yeah, I've had my run-in with Conops a few times, and he's always I've been able to talk with him, but we function at a slightly different wavelength, and a lot of the topics that interest us that we don't have as much of an overlap.
Yeah, he has an interesting take. Like you don't hear a lot of people who have as standard a take as him. Honestly, because most people in the sphere are less typical. They're more divergent. But he seems like in a lot of ways a typical European political thinker, right? Albeit more aware of dissident thought than most. Uh-oh.
Yeah, as far as I know, I don't know if he produces his own content. So his like whole streaming character is one of these things. And like maybe if we talk about Josh Neal, I thought that was kind of interesting. But that relation, like how do you relate to someone who you don't really know who they are? So just like, oh, it's really interesting to talk to this random person from Europe, Conops, who knows a lot about these various topics. And it's like, but like you really don't know anything about them.
That's the great thing about Kyle's show is he's literally like taking the trolls on head on and kind of doing like what I do. That's part of the reason I like Kyle. You're not afraid of the dissident opinions.
Right.
Wait, so if you
I hear that you and Brundle buried the axe.
Very interesting.
Sorry about that.
Did you and Brundle bury the axe finally?
The axe. It was more like we buried the Panzer. But yeah, I think hopefully things have calmed down. Like I have no idea what the future holds, though. To be honest, he really seems to like.
He has no grounding anymore. I mean, it's like he's not a real identity, so his grounding is in being a popular streamer. And he doesn't stream enough to have So when he comes in, he's going to have a confrontation with people. He'll be reduced to just a troll. So it's different if you're like a content producer with your own audience and you have run-ins or problems with somebody. But if you're not a content producer and you're just you're an anonymous identity that's causing problems with people, you don't want to be. That's just a troll. So like I don't see Brundle.
Hey,
he's
Rodney,
got to
good to see you.
Reinvent himself to have any staying power.
Did you hear that Rodney Martin finally came back after all these months?
Did you know that he was dead for a while?
Yeah. Well, I had heard that he was having some issues, but thankfully he I was glad to hear his voice again. Frankly I wasn't expecting to ever hear from him again.
Wow, that is an interesting turn of events. Did you want to tell us a little bit about your week in review, Kyle? Then we can go on to maybe your thoughts about this Josh Neal doxing thing.
Oh, I could talk about that now. I think it's always regrettable when doxings go down. I don't know if you want to talk about the revelations of it, but just in brief, it just sort of fit what I had seen from him before in a sense. Like I suspected, like you see with Luke Ford and you see with other people who are in the mental health space in some way or another, that they'll have a certain ethos behind them, like in terms of they respect boundaries around mental health, right? They respect boundaries around diagnoses to an extent, and so he sort of had that perspective to him. Myself, I'm not. I've never really been involved in that space. Never been to a therapist. Never involved myself in that space, and so the ethics of that space are more foreign to me. Like you've heard me call Brundle mentally ill a whole lot, and I don't think much of it. But yeah, like I think that the doxing just shows the kind of cannibalistic nature of the dissident right at the moment. I mean, he was doxed by people who thought he wasn't extreme enough, or thought that he was too involved with Richard Spencer or something like that. You know, it's just.
Yeah, I want to comment on that
Go ahead.
from a meta perspective here. We've got to look at the timing on this when we got Milo dropping this bizarre Spencer rant, this with Josh Neal, and a lesser known reference to a Norman Hobbs stream where Patrick Bateman declined comment on an apparent doxing attempt carried out by the Wignats that related in some measure to Augustus Invictus. So that tells me maybe this is actually some kind of centralized thing.
Yeah, a friend of mine who is sort of, just watching this, noted, with Shapiro attacking Fuentes and then Milo attacking, what's his face, Spencer. It was like a double blow to the more hard-edged version of the dissident right. And the effects remain to be seen. But this blow against Josh is yet another in that pattern. Although in this case, I think it was going from the opposite direction, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I mean, Luke Ford summed it up pretty well. I mean, one thing you said, like, you can't be surprised that they're going to be able to find out who you are. Like, I thought if I wanted to, it would have been pretty easy to find out who he is, just from the amount of information. But like, I didn't care. I didn't look into it. Although, his doxing to me was kind of positive. Like, okay, dude's could be a psychology professor. And like, he's got very good ratings. Like, like I looked up, and he's a well-liked professor, and I could see like he was a pretty good streamer, pretty attuned. To say that he holds these beliefs, that he had some sort of transformative process, and look at the dissonance of like not necessarily multiple personalities, but if he's functioning, okay, he's in a band that may maybe drops him. Like that's the news. His band dropped him, but it's got like a black and a gay man and a Jew. But then he's got his internet personality, and there's some sort of dissonance, and the dissonance could be in real life too, where a person is like, I hate diversity, but yet they're living amongst it. And however he develops these two dissonant personalities, it's interesting. I don't.
Are
think
they
this
dissonant?
Has to be
Are they really dissonant? Me and some other friends have noted that people who are really stridently anti-Semitic often have Jewish relatives or in-laws, and so I think that proximity does lead to that sort of response a lot of the time. A fellow named Eke Lux, who's part of these circles, he seems extremely stridently angry, and I think that has a lot to do with demographic change in his exact neighborhood. He's around a lot of diversity, and that makes it so that he's angry. I would add, though, that I stand by my analysis that this diversity makes it a lot harder for a white identitarian party to arise. It's just that it creates these feelings, right? It creates these negative feelings in a lot of people. It's just that it also makes it less practical.
Right, just from the psychology, where a person has dissonance, where if you're a professor in like a university that's majority minority, and he's well liked among the minorities, and then he's got this world where he's like, I hate diversity, I hate these demographic changes, but that doesn't correspond to how he acts during the day, because you see like, oh, he's a professor to majority minorities, and he's well liked, and he might be good at it. So like, whatever his belief system, there's kind of like the law, you're functioning following rules, and then kind of like his belief system, I don't like what's happening even though I'm complying. So I think it's interesting. We'll see if he's capable of reinventing himself, because he could try to just like disappear and be transferred and start new career in a new place, and that's possible. But it's like a war out there, and you see like the enormity of the stake of the argument, the culture war is going on, that just collateral damage. Richard Spencer, Jews have the habit, in general, but maybe all society, America, of making a boogeyman. And for a while we had Ahmadinejad, the Iranian president, were just like, like he was the boogeyman, and anyone who was associated with the boogeyman was bad. And racism, and like really Trump to some extent, but certainly Richard Spencer has became that punching bag boogeyman for just everything bad. And so, man, it's not surprising.
Emmanuel Goldstein
Who's that?
is a bad guy from
the character.
1984.
Yeah.
So you said
Yes,
it was
I
a
don't know,
positive
you-
thing, Duvid, but I don't think you've elaborated on that. Why do you think it's a positive step for this to occur?
Well, I think it's because he has a relatively good resume, and you're saying like, from Duvid's perspective, okay, I disagree with him, but like I don't see why like he could be a good professor and have wrong ideas or theology, or you could be professional and think what you want, and that so it doesn't really bother me as long as say he obeys the law. He could think whatever he wants. He could espouse whatever ideas, but the
But
clamp
there
right
it sounds
now.
like you think it's a negative thing that he got doxxed because he loses all that.
Well, I don't think it matters that he got doxxed. Like it's
Okay.
probably a good thing for anybody that's dissonant enough where they have like a fake personality where they espouse off their ideas. You probably have some pretty severe psychological issues facing them if you need to create an internet personality and talk about things that you can't say under your real name. Yeah, you probably got to have some issues, and saying like no offense to like to my fans or the people who watch this stuff. But you'd say, okay, why you might need to do that. And dissonance isn't like you're saying dissonance is something that everybody deals with. There's no way to not have dissonance because that's the nature of the world. So, but to answer that by creating this fake internet personality, and then what's the difference between you and the real personality, and the people that are going to go after him, where basically racism has become the new boogeyman. So on the right you had like, if you see something, say something. And
Sorry to interrupt, but Mike, I can hear background noise on you, bud. If you don't mind muting. Oh, he just dropped off. Yeah, Mike, come on in anytime. We'd
I'll
love to.
finish up here, but I was thinking that earlier that the right took this. If you see something, say something, that largely referred to like terrorism, or even specifically Islamic terrorism. But on the left has became like racism, and if you're hanging out in liberal circles, it's like if you see something, say something. If something's a racist, like you have to say something. You have to try to ruin that person's life. That is your obligation. And so yeah. I don't see where he couldn't see the pressure wasn't going to be there. And like ironically, like the ADL in my area, like the ADL is like second-rate Jewish lawyers, like volunteer. They're mostly women. They're relatively good, fine people. Somehow they ended up employed by the ADL, but they're like like ironically like middle-aged Jewish mothers that staff the ADL, and they're going to make the.
How is that
call.
ironic exactly? Bunch of harpies trying to morally police people. Isn't that exactly what you expect?
Well, because they think they're doing something positive. So I could speak with these people, and they're worried because they feel like if you see something, say something, and they think they're serving some sort of like cosmic duty, where like okay, they're a do-gooder, they have a job doing what they love, and they get paid for it, and it's good for society, at least in their own head, and they're just standing up against the evildoers. And
is it good for society that a person like
okay,
Josh?
Gandalf, we know.
Well, we don't have to argue the point, but I'm saying that if you have a realistic, the dissonance comes like Richard Spencer or something like this is the current state of karma. In your dissonance, you could have your theory, your belief system of what you think the best way, but you're saying you can't, God forbid, as the horrible cliche, you have your own facts, but you're saying the current state of karma, what is the current reality? What are the demographic breakdowns? And then you as a separate person with your own belief system, we could still agree about the current state of karma, because that should be like relatively blatant, because that's both what our experiences should match on the matter. If we're both relatively intelligent people that are perceptive of the world around us, even if we have completely different belief systems and directions and what we're fighting for, that doesn't mean that we have to disagree about the current state of karma.
Cool. Thanks for filling us in, Duvid. Mike, I just noticed you joined the panel. Did you want to hop on in, give us your thoughts, and tell us where you'd like us to direct the conversation next, buddy?
And you watch Josh Neal every show, right? Mike, you were one of his fans?
Yeah. I didn't watch all his shows, but I watched some of his shows. I mean, okay, Josh has some distasteful ideas, but he's good at running a live stream. Like, he's an alpha male. He's the type of guy everyone would like. He just has some ideas that are distasteful to a large part of society. But I think the main lesson you got to learn is learn from his mistake. Don't put your face on the internet unless you want to be known, because it's not that hard to figure out who you are. This is for everybody, even if you're not a big time name like Josh Neal. Like, you're on the internet. I live in XYZ place. This is my face. It's really not that hard to figure out who you are. It just depends on how much resources people want to devote to it. I'm sure you're probably aware they had pictures of the people that marched with the lanterns at Charlottesville. They posted them online. They figured out who those people were. They fired them. And so I'm not saying it's right. It's just the reality. Just don't be stupid. Don't post your shit online.
Well, just to add to that real quick is all it takes is somebody who knows you IRL to recognize your voice on one of these shit streams. So even if you're disguising your voice, if someone knows you, pretty good chance they can see through that. In fact, I used to work in law enforcement, and that's like a way to validate a voice.
But I feel like that's exceedingly unlikely unless I send this link to my friend.
Well, as you get bigger, and when you appear with maybe someone infamous like Richard Spencer, you're probably going to have hundreds of people that are going to be curious who you are, and it might be more likely something that's going to be national. The
point is, it only takes one person to recognize you, and how many people could recognize you by your voice is the question. It's a matter of
500. People.
I mean, we know Jennifer's had minor points of fame, and like I've had minor points of fame, been in the newspaper or something like that. Some like kind of random, because sometimes you could like carry yourself around big for a few days if you get like a paper in the newspaper. He's like, why you
Mike
all
is largely
up?
right
like, well,
here.
didn't you read the newspaper?
You can't.
And
it's just not that many people who know your voice. Obviously,
but then if it was a periodical or something, what's the big deal?
Ultra testosterone. That's not very ultra testosterone of you. You should just get a voice changer.
Why you think you're all awesome, or something like that? And
you get a text to speech.
But there's a price of publicity.
That would be funny.
It's your loss of privacy. So that should just be like a given. You're not going to be able to build yourself up as an e-personality, and even to selectively, like you would just say, like, I don't expect to meet any of you people in real life. This is just the way that I have conversations or a proving ground for my ideas. And like, no, I'm not doing this to make friends. I don't even want to know who you are. I don't care who you are. Versus you're going to be like kind of selective. Like, well, I pull out a friend here and there, and that may not work so well. You might try to pull out a friend here and there. And you're saying you may not be able to navigate in the way where you're successfully able to determine who you can and can't give your information to. And I guess if we got movement critically, fed Rodney. He would be an expert in.
Before we say hi to Rodney here, I just wanted to say, I've already been recognized IRL, not by a fan, but by another content producer, just by sheer chance. So that's why I say it's largely a matter of time. I have no idea how famous we're going to get, but it's a bit silly to think you're never going to get found out. It's just a matter of either controlling it or waiting till it happens to you, or maybe you get lucky and you're just never interesting enough to actually get, doxed and have that actually mean something, right? Because if, there's a dox that happens on a stream with 7 people watching and it never goes anywhere,
I just had a point to make on that, if you don't mind.
You could also try to be famous as anonymous. And I mean, there's been people, like ghostwriters and things like that. But in these technological age, you're like, if you just want to have a few goof off conversations and lay low, but as people get bigger, that's you're not going to be able to hide yourself. When you got 10 people watching you, 100 people watching you, someone's going to be like, I want to find out who this guy is. And if you have hundreds of people trying to find out who you are, chances are someone's going to be able to figure it out.
I mean, no one's friend is wandering onto the shit. You know what I mean? The odds are exceedingly low, way less than 1%.
I get that,
And-
but all it takes is
But
one
because no one
person.
cares. It was saying all it takes is a few people that care, and once you're big, you don't need like ADL wannabes. You're just going to be like, well, hundreds of thousands of people, saw this thing, and like one
Yeah,
person.
I mean, it's just a
if
question of
anyone who's
numbers, how long you do it, right? If you do it for years and years
anyone
and
who
years,
experienced
then the chances that
legitimate
they get
fame knows.
revealed are large, right? But if you just do it like as much as Mike does it, I think the chances of him getting revealed, like from his exposure so far, relatively low. Although there are people who are motivated, and so that ups the danger a lot. That you have motivated people going after you.
It's if you see something, say something. So if someone's going to be like, this Mike guy's a racist and he has to be stopped, and it's my duty to just track him down, figure out who he is, and try to ruin his life, in order to repair the world. You got to think, is there really that person that's listening to this that's going to feel like that? And that's unlikely. But if you start trying to organize in real life, organizing, if you start teaming up with people that are really have federal cases on them, or that are extremely hated people, that there's millions of people around the world that attach to a person's name and revile them. Like, yeah, I mean, it should be kind of obvious. Like,
right, marching is extremely dangerous because like it just takes one jackass doing something bad, and then like the whole thing is going to be absolutely plastered with media coverage, and very negative media coverage at that. And you will have people trying to dox every person.
Too. You could just be a Jew with your opinions, and when you try to blast them out, you'd be like, wow, my opinions actually aren't that popular. And you got to rethink your status of you're trying to you repair the world or something. So you were saying it's kind of universal. It's affecting everybody. In Duvidism, the main factor here, the push factor, I mean, there's the demographic change and people, the dissonance of dealing with it, but it's basically technology and the rapid push for people trying to adapt to this technology changes.
But I mean, you just got to be aware of. I'm just going to speak for like 10 seconds and I'm done. The more you reveal online, that it's so easy to reveal who you are. Like you don't even realize that you show a picture, your race, your approximate age, your appearance. People can use that against you. So,
and then if it was actually
I applaud all of you for showing your faces online. I think you're brave. You're braver than me. That's fine, but just be aware of what you're doing.
But you're saying if you actually had the weight of the corporations or the federal government, that they could look into your ISBN number or your port and connect who you are, and if you're not like
you don't need to worry about that. The feds already have everybody's information and they're tracking everything.
It's not that complicated. It's not that complicated.
Yeah, but they can't show a video of like what you're
because you think the punishment has to fit the crime, and you think, okay, like Mike, the punishment has to fit the crime, and if you think about it, you're like, well, okay, like God forbid if you lose your job one day and someone's like, oh, I heard this guy online, he's that racist, and then you lose your job or something like that, God forbid, you say, okay, did the punishment fit the crime that like one of these tapes got back and they played it to your boss, and you think, oh, like, no, you're not worried about that either. You're your own boss, or your boss is like, I don't give a crap what this guy's saying on some stupid internet show, as long as he gets to get the crap done, like he's going to get paid.
Right.
Well, the odds of that are exceedingly low. I just think you have to learn from
zero, but they're not zero, though, Mike. I hear what you're saying, but they're not zero. That's really important.
Okay, so we don't show our faces, but I think of the rest of the people that show their faces. I mean, maybe they're stupid and maybe they're really brave, but you have to acknowledge the difference. You know what I mean?
Well, is it because they're having a dissonance, like you're saying, like relatively, these are just fantasy streams that have nothing to do with your reality, because in reality, in the real world, people are embracing and trying to do their best to get ahead in a multicultural world, and then they have their dissonance on the internet where they complain about multiculturalism, but when they go to work the next day, they're going to be like, shit, like I am not fitting in, like I'm not getting ahead in this multicultural world. What do I have to do?
Well, what came first, people not fitting in or people doing these streams with the dissonance? I think people not fitting in.
They're coming about the same time. I mean, they're
do we want to say hi to Rodney, who's been on the call for a bit? We're at Luke Ford levels of people here, so I just kind of want to make sure everyone has a chance to talk, so nobody gets too bored. Hey, I never met you before, but I I've seen a couple of your live stream appearances from Brundlefly's channel, so that it's nice to meet you. Maybe you can say hi, introduce yourself to the audience. This is a Church of Entropy, and I think Kyle is actually co-streaming. So, yeah, over to you, Rodney.
Is it working? Can you hear me?
Yep, you sound great.
Yep.
Okay, wanted to make sure.
Rodney, you're on Weekend Review with Duvid. I really enjoyed some of those first streams where we argued for hours about immigration and the ethno state and balkanization. Me and Church of Entropy have been doing this for over half a year. Every week we kind of just review the happenings of different streams and characters and their rises and falls. And a lot of the characters are characters because from the Luke Ford Brundle. So we're honored that you came on, and hope to hear a quick breakdown of what you've been actively involved in and what you might be doing in the near future.
Well, this doxing thing, I think it's not so much the feds are out devoting a lot of amount of their budget trying to determine who people are. Most of the doxing, if you look at the articles, have come from within the so-called alt-right. It's come from family, and it's come from friends.
Right here.
So the government, for that point, really doesn't have to do much about it, nor does Antifa.
So far, the government hasn't mattered much at all.
Left. They have done some doxing, but if you look at the major people, particularly when they took the pictures of the Tiki Torch people, which was stupid, most of those doxes came from family members, from friends. It didn't come from exterior forces, on the political realm. Granted, some did, but for the most part, particularly if there's some sort of cause for concern of criminality, the government's been getting their information from people that are the closest and supposed allies. And this goes to one of my biggest criticism of this alt-right is it's incredibly self-destructive. They engage in piranha type tactics. They're just as soon to eat their own as they are the enemy. And this is where the left has always prevailed because they have extreme discipline. They actually plan things out, and they also have the resources to back up what they're going to do. But my opinion is most of the doxing, and which we've seen it recently as well. There's been this, the alt-right has literally adopted those same tactics of doxing, and in the meantime, the left is sitting back with popcorn, watching everyone eat their own on the dissonant right.
So, Rodney,
I think it's
do you think it has to do with their ideology?
I think it's abhorrent that I think it. First of all, I think it's abhorrent for a parent to dox their own child, and that has happened. You had an article recently, I think it was on CNN, where a mother wrote an article because she'd snooped into her two teenage boys, or I guess they weren't completely, they weren't like 18 or 19, but they were, I think, 14 and 16. The age is irrelevant. But that mother literally, she didn't name
Israel
them,
is way more
but by identifying and writing the article and saying that her children, her two teenage boys, were she was
one thing you can fall
concerned
victim to
about
is
what she
believing
even described what she
hype
found
from
on their
the alt-right
computers,
about Israel.
Milk toast, lukewarm memes. I think that is akin to child abuse because those children are now those kids are going to have a target on their back, and for that to come from a parent, to me, is akin to child abuse. Likewise, we've had brothers. Now, I don't believe you can dox somebody that's already gone out and did stuff publicly. Once you go out publicly, take your mask off, and engage in a public demonstration, you've become literally a public. You've entered politics as a whole. So you got to be really careful.
I'm in the
hangout. So for people that had marched in that march and under their own face and revealed themselves, that was their coming out party, and for them to claim doxing per se, that is, I think that's a stretch. Whereas someone that chooses to be anonymous because they feel that they are, they're living in an area where they could suffer personal attacks, which is very real, economic attacks, which is very real. But for someone to deliberately reveal that person, to me, that's a dox, and that's reprehensible. Someone of their own family, someone of their own so-called political persuasion, I think that's abhorrent. We expect that from the left. And then just to cap it off, I always wondered how the heck people that had these fake names and monikers on sites like Stormfront, how were they exposed? Who would, that leads me to believe people got to be very careful who they put in the admin roles of these forums.
There was a recent
Well,
Iron Front leak, which included IP addresses of all the users. And yeah, I think it was just a hack, an Antifa hack. And it's a fairly sophisticated thing, running a website and making sure that everything is secure. And they failed at that. And maybe as you say, maybe it could have been an inside job as well. But the question for me is, how do we get people who understand the problems with the left's ideology, but don't fall into this sort of self-destructive and pathological and misanthropic spiral that we see?
Well, those people you're talking about, Kyle, have always been the dominant characters that have run out the people that actually have a skill set, that actually have an education, that actually have, say, a military back, something to contribute. And they're always perceived, they're always attacked by these people. I've always considered them to be, less than or dreamers. We had the famous Eli Mosley that lied about his military, career. It's always been those types, the bottom feeders that have run out, the cream. And let me tell you, nobody wants to take a bath in a sewer. And that's been the problem with the alt-right for the most part. Anybody that shares some semblance of that worldview, that may have completed an education, has a wife and kids, has a career, has some skills, they are immediately perceived either as a threat or as a fed or as a, not a true believer. And yet it's always the bottom feeders that I'm talking about that run the good people out. They're always the ones that are the first to flip when the FBI knocks on the door, because their own personal habits and lack of discipline make them a liability. So the feds just watch them. They watch their computer, and maybe they visit websites they're not supposed to. Maybe they go and pick up a lady or a man of the night, and the feds use that, and they're always the first to roll.
Yep.
So the alt-right has
reminds me, Rodney,
problems.
of something I read from a German general, actually, and he was talking about how people change in war, and it's often like the tough ne'er-do-wells who suddenly turn into sobbing and cowardly individuals, while the person who was unassuming and just did the job, went to work every day, had a shop, had to open it in the morning early on and work and hump it. That kind of person goes into the trenches and it can go up into the breach. And so, yeah, there's that vast difference.
That person, also the one that cries for mama, that usually has the biggest mouth, they are also the ones that are more apt to shoot women and children behind the lines rather than engage the enemy that has a weapon. They suffer from some very serious issues. Your organization is only as strong as your best people that are in it. And all it takes is one. And it's usually those people that are screaming the loudest, the underachievers by choice, as I call them, that generally get rolled by the feds and bring down the entire organization. And people may not want to hear that, but look at history. That's been the history of the dissident right since the 1970s.
Yeah, and specifically, like I noticed that thread throughout, the world wars, was people complaining about the rear echelon forces, like they'd even like steal jackets, warm jackets that were going up to the front, because they didn't want to have to go out in the cold for a few minutes while they were walking from barracks to barracks. But the people in the front lines, they were the ones who needed that stuff, and it's just yeah, there's an astonishing entitlement that goes along with not sacrificing. And that's, I think what we see operative here. The people who do the work to get things done, they tend to have more of an appreciation of virtue, but the kind of sloth and the kind of just braggadocio that breeds itself like a kind of immorality.
Well, this is why another epithet I give myself is Gandalf the Severe. The behavior of a lot of these right-wing, alt-right, white nationalist type people is effing disgusting. You can have a lot of criticisms of me. I mean, a lot of people don't like, I yell and do some of that stuff. I do that, not to be deceptive. I do that for a very specific purpose, to kind of change the mood of streams so that people stay focused on certain things in a certain way. But, I don't go out there try and destroy people. It's just not what I do. I want to talk about ideas. I like talking about tough ideas. I mean, I was on a stream with Claire earlier today. We had Cade and a Muslim fella, and at the end, all three of us are like, yeah, we all agree and we can respect each other. And we had some tough discussions. We were getting at each other's throats, and it's fine at the end, because in the end, it's like, I'm not really looking. I'm not one of these people that's spoiling for a fight. Those kind of people are really dangerous. People that think spoiling for a fight's a good idea don't know what being in a fight's really all about. I mean, if you weren't beat up as a kid in high school, as I was, chasing, the captain of the football team's girl, true story, you don't know anything. I mean, people that think war is glorious, that think siege posting is glorious, I mean, the kind of stuff you do, no. Like, chaos and disorder is terrible. Lots of people who you wouldn't expect, who, don't cause any trouble, don't really want to be a part of a fight on any side, however you want to demarcate the lines of battle, so to speak, get hurt. And I don't particularly like seeing that. I don't like chaos. I don't like violence. I don't like fantasizing about it in a way that isn't anything but, clinical and sober. And, clinical and sober understanding of violence is something you don't see among these kind of people. And that has got to change. I mean, I know people that survived the war in Serbia. I know Libyans, both in real life, because I do have friends that are Muslim and non-white. I make that very fucking clear, and I'll defend them before I'll defend any goddamn Wignat. Because this, I'm not some fucking racial nationalist about everything. I know people that have gone through wars. I've heard their stories. I know what it's like. I don't want to live in a society that's, James Mason, siege, everything. And if you're promoting that, I'm going to fucking counter signal your ass hardcore, because peace, order, and prosperity. And people who aren't trying to get as close as they can to that are dangerous people.
Yeah, it's a bit of a LARP, because, you can't really kill your enemies because they just reincarnate. I mean, there's got to be some other way to put the fear of God into them. God forbid. Because killing people is like supreme beta, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, there's a distinction between people who are who are ready for a fight and people who are sadistic. And there's a lot of sadism among... Like, sadism is not that common in the population, but it's hugely common in, like, weird niche areas, like what Pill Eater called queer spaces, funnily enough, and I like that moniker. Places where you have people who reject the norms of society. Some of those people can be wonderful, but some of those people can be terrible, and you have to be able to understand what you're getting into when you go into these spaces. When you take off the veil of normalcy, that covers most people, you find that you're just exposed directly to the varieties of human nature. And some people are, as I said, sadistic, and they attract each other, and they get into clubs, and despite the fact that they never have the capacity to achieve much as a collective or on their own, what they can do is just make noise and confuse and demoralize, and that's what's happening right now.
Yeah, well said, Kyle. I guess.
But I wonder what the solution is. Like Jared Taylor seems to be one of the more successful individuals. Steve Saylor, another one who's pretty successful. They're both fairly genteel, right? They both have that. They both attach importance to credibility, and I think that helps them a lot. What I wish is that I wish that the mainstream conservatives could be approached in a more productive way. That's, I think, where I diverge the most from the dissident right, is that I think that if there's not going to be a synthesis where the current set of elites is gradually converged with a more sane set of policies for the people in this country, then there is no a real other option as far as this country is concerned, as far as the West is concerned. I don't believe that revolution can ever really be a viable path in terms of alleviating the problems that we have. Because I just look at past revolutions, almost universally, they cause more problems than they solve. Almost universally, the people who start them do not feel great about their conclusion.
Yeah, I think you're kind of coming to a good point here, Kyle. Like, the real revolution that needs to happen before the material revolutions can, be anything good, is it has to be some sort of spiritual thing. I know that sounds contrived, but it is true. Like, it's about a shared vision. And that's what the value of these conversations is. We're hammering out a shared vision.
Robespierre didn't survive to Napoleon, and Trotsky didn't survive to Stalin. Revolutions consume their children, and the first movers, the ones most anxious for material success without spiritual development, self-improvement, and sobriety, are the ones who were first to fall. So the first revolutionaries actually don't survive most of their revolutions. So it's even worse than Kyle says, though Kyle's largely correct.
Yeah, it's just very sobering because emotionally, I feel resonance with revolutionaries. I feel a sense of injustice, and I feel like I can, I can subliminate my emotions with action, like it's just an instinctive feeling. But then I just look intellectually at what the results of this kind of giving yourself over to that rage does, and it doesn't do good things, right? There are people
Well,
who...
you can understand.
Go
You
ahead.
can understand the idealism, right, Kyle? You can understand the idealism, but the frustration is that I think we kind of have the same frustration that, like, that idealism is not grounded in something realistic, is going to just be a destructive force, essentially.
Right. There needs to be, yeah, it needs to be grounded in something. It needs to be grounded in systems that create accountability, right? Because in large part, this impulse, which people can recognize inside themselves, I believe, this impulse to turn over toss over the table, flip the table, flip the chessboard, it's an impulse which can be righteous, but whatever else it is, it's also a way to avoid responsibility. And so that seed is a very dark seed that bears bitter fruit. And so to try to extract that, I think one of the more cliche people in this space is Jordan Peterson, but I think he has a lot of points. Jordan Peterson has a lot of points about how you should always see responsibility in yourself. And if you're analyzing things as just you're the oppressed person, everyone else is the oppressor, then you need to look inward. You need to get to gain some more inward understanding. And I think that's one of his best contributions.
Kyle?
Go ahead. I hear you.
Hey, okay, it'll work now this time. A couple of takes real briefly. When you hear about the victim, I talked about this on Luke Ford's stream, the victimology. That's what makes the alt-right almost identical to Black Lives Matter. And that's why both of those organizations, or whatever you want to call them, has no real mass support in either of the communities. Believe it or not, Black Lives Matter does not have mass support in the Black community any more than the alt-right has mass support in the white community. Nobody wants to rally to the side of a victim. I mean, you can't rally people on your knees. And then getting back to the people that always are out there being the loudest mouth. We talked about this probably over a year ago on Luke Ford's show. They were calling for race war. Let me just point them to the direction of Mexico and those Mormon family that was wiped out, the women and children. That is what you will get in that type of a situation, which means it's absolutely idiotic to even think along those terms, because that is an example. And I've seen far worse in the Balkans in the 90s than that.
I have friends from high school who survived Serbia. I've heard lots of stories you wouldn't want to know. Which is why, after 9/11, when everyone was, all the normie conservatives were, oh, well, let's go into Iraq, let's go into Libya. No. In every single war we fought, interfering in other people's civil affairs, every single war we fought my entire life, and the more I've gotten aware of how complex politics is and how little I really want bad relations with other groups of people, every war we fought has made me more angry at the establishment and more make me dislike war all the more. I'm not a pacifist because I realize, yes, the world is a chaotic, violent place. Supernovas blow up and galaxies disappear. I get it. But, while we have peace, we should treasure it and look to buttress it as opposed to just turn it over for the sake of turning it over. And that kind of nihilism and sadism is just not acceptable. I make people that are going to associate with me be really fanatical about peace order, prosperity. If you're not about moving everything in that direction, whatever, even if under conditions of doubt and uncertainty, if you're still not pushing in that direction as far as possible that you humanly can go, do not fucking associate with me.
To actually provide are, right? And so what I would like is like the family to be an absolutely protected unit, so that there is a head of a household, and that head of the household has authority, and it's clear, who is with who in that regard. I'd like the nation to be, at the fore, to have national loyalties that are clear, and I mean loyalties to a territory, a flag, a people that are united under that banner. And I think that given those things, much else sort of falls into place, and you can have, a lot of movement, right? Uh, you know, uh, Also in war, you gain flexibility through organization that is along the right lines. A certain amount of organization makes it so that you can move in these far-reaching ways. And I see this much the same. We need to have a strong center, a set of principles which are sacrosanct, but then the rest can be relatively flexible.
Yes, but one point you're missing, Kyle, is the left and the right are almost united on honoring, what I call the new normal, which is the lunatics running the asylum. They are both in unison in supporting policies and trends and whatever you want to call it that attack those very things. You have conservatives now saying the United States is just ideas, while the left says there's no such thing as ethnicity or race. Well, that's almost the same argument, except Charlie Kirk and company make an exception for one country, which we won't talk about tonight. And then you have single motherhood and no fault divorce as bedrock policies that both what we would call conservative Inc. and the left champion. You have no effective opposition in terms of this two-party system to this cultural decline. You're talking about culture. Everything flows from culture. If your culture is corrupted, if your culture is in the sewer, then you're not going to have a healthy nation state, which the United States doesn't meet that definition anyway. But everything flows from culture, and both conservative Inc., the Republican Party, whatever you want to call it, has been in lockstep with the left just in their own way. The conservative Inc. has looked at a way to profit from the social engineering that the left has been ramming down the country's throat since the late 1940s. Everyone talks about 1965 as the genesis. This started in the late 40s, immediately after the troops came home from World War II.
So here's
Sam
something. Go ahead. Yeah, actually, if I could just say quickly.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah. So I agree with you, Rodney. But I think that the family needs to be the focus, and like you say, it was much earlier than this gender and race stuff was the beginning of the dissolution of the family unit, and that really needs to be reversed. And like you say, it's not even political at this point. Everybody agrees that you need to have, marriage can't mean much.
Okay.
You just have to be able to be free. That freedom has to be prioritized over everything. And really, at this point, I become allergic to the talk about all the other cultural sexual stuff, because I don't see how that's relevant when the foundation has already been undermined.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit if we can expand on it. To do what you're talking about, making the family, sacred again. Then you're going to have. There's only 3 states, I believe, left in the union that has contested divorce. You have to prove there's a reason why that divorce is can't be saved. New York, believe it or not, liberal New York is not a no-fault state. Arkansas is the other one. I can't remember the other 2 or 3, but you're going to have to get rid of no-fault divorce. 2, you're going to have to get rid of this silly notion of honoring single mothers that have maybe 3 or 4 kids from 3 or 4 different fathers, and replacing the father with a welfare check. You're going to challenge that. Neither of the 2 established parties, which have the political power, and this is what I said about the alt-right from the beginning, a lot of the what I call the internet right now, they have no idea the beast which they face. it's worse than the iceberg analogy. So you're going to have to get rid of that. When I got my first non-government health plan, one that wasn't provided from my government employer, believe it or not, maternity was an option. Maternity was something you had to pay to add a rider on. So if you want to have kids, you pay for that additional rider on your insurance policy. And by the way, if you want to go a big step forward, then take maternity out of the Medicaid system and make people pay for their own kids. Then you'll start modifying behaviors. But it's probably too late because of, one, the demographic shift, and also the mental shift that's even in people that can describe themselves the most conservative. They honor these same things that they are embracing ideas and philosophies and worldviews that have led to the destruction of the family. So I know of people right now that I can text or call right now that talk about we need to strengthen the family, but they support gay marriage. They honor single mothers. They think we should give welfare out to every young 14 or 15 or 16-year-old that gets pregnant, and then keep providing welfare. So they themselves have political schizophrenia on the issue.
But in some sense, that should give you hope, shouldn't it? That there really isn't anybody pushing for the righteous perspective on marriage and on the family, because that means that maybe it's possible if you could get a cadre doing that, you'd see movement. If we were where we are, despite like tons of people pushing on this rock, then there'd be less hope. But as it is, it seems like almost nobody is actually trying in the first place, and that means that if you could get a bunch of people to try, then maybe things would move.
Yeah, Kyle, I wanted to bring this back to one of the conflicts that's kind of come to the forefront lately, this gay question. I don't know how much of what you, whether you saw the gay gentleman that went on Claire's. I know it was mentioned to you by Conops on your show there, but it sort of shows that there is sort of room for improvement in terms of how this whole thing is approached.
Right. On the issue of sexuality, I almost see it as entirely a sideshow. And I've said before, I find it excruciatingly boring. And I think that people who obsess over gays are giving them exactly what they want. It's here's something that people should know. It's like when you talk. When you talk the feminist perspective, the feminists try to ruin your life. When you wax histrionic about the gays are jerking off about that. I hope you know. I mean, it's a large gay thing, a large gay practice to basically try to inspire as much homophobia and outrage as possible, which they then fap to. And so I find the whole subject, the obsession with the subject, distasteful and undesirable. I want people to focus on the family, on people who are interested in reproducing, and those who exclude themselves from that process by any means, whether it be the incels or the MGTOWs or the homosexuals, whatever they want to do, they can do what they like. But for the people who want to be part of the future, who want to have families, they need to get their act in order.
Dank take from Kyle. Wow. I want to just quickly add to that. Like, it sort of seems to be that maybe there are like married people and unmarried people are in two different classes of society. And because the homosexuals and the incels are in the same category, they're warring with each other. And from what it seems like you're saying, and I think I kind of share your views, is that we should be mostly focused on knowledge, and if that comes in the body of a person who's that way oriented, it's like doesn't really become an issue until it's like being promoted or it's promoting degeneracy in some other way, right?
I want to police people who are interested in reproduction. I want to get them on the righteous path. People who are not interested in reproduction, I mean, who exclude themselves from that, like, whatever, right? They're not part of the conversation. And they can try to make themselves part of the conversation, but they're never going to be part of that conversation. And so, yeah.
Kyle,
if it's not related to that, then I don't see why. I wouldn't ignore someone for being gay. I wouldn't ignore someone for being a MGTOW or an incel either. I do kind of put them in the same kind of camp. And in that regard, there are certain issues for which they're just not germane because they're not part of that game. And that has to be said. But beyond that, whatever, right? I think it's not interesting. And incels and MGTOWs and homosexuals will talk forever about their sexual desires or lack thereof if you let that happen. And that probably shouldn't be the conversation.
Gandalf, Kyle, did you want to jump in, buddy? I think Gandalf started talking before.
I agree with Kyle about 90%, but
I do think the sexual issues are extremely important because we live in a very overly eroticized and yet undersexed culture at the same time. I mean, it's not normal to have a culture where a country's, main historic demographic, and actually other demographics like Black America. I've met a lot of Black MGTOWs that have opened up to me and told me some horror stories. That one guy in particular, who's a sweet guy, I mean, what his ex-wife did to him is one of the worst things I've ever heard in my life. I won't go into it. But anyway, how we approach sexuality, there needs to be, it's a major problem. Okay. We can't discount it. It's not normal to have 30% of men in this generational cohort be MGTOW, incel, gay, whatever, looped in this thing. Societies have not survived, leaving such a kindling of men. I mean, this is this is why the Arab Spring happened. I mean, to some degree over in those countries. Because
it's even worse in China, by the way.
Yeah, China is a tinderbox too. That's why I'm a China bear. I'm not a China bull. All these people that are like, oh, China's going to grow. Look at their financial balance sheet. I'm like, well, look at the health of their men and their family formation.
Well, look at Japan's another one. Japan's dying. We don't have a reproduction problem, Kyle. We've had plenty of people that are reproducing. We have the wrong people that are reproducing. And this goes to having to make structural changes to assure that the right people reproduce. Let's just be honest. Is it healthy to have single mothers with 5 kids from 5 or 4 or 5 different? No, it is not. That needs to be discouraged. You do that by altering these social programs. Is it healthy to allow people to fly into the country, drop a crotch dropping, and say, oh, that automatically establishes citizenship? No, it isn't. The problem isn't reproduction. The problem is the right people are not reproducing. You have to go and ask why and how that has happened. We see it in Japan.
I was talking to a friend about
Japan
just this subject, and
yeah,
what
there's no mystery there. It's the welfare state and propaganda.
Which end of the curve do you focus on? I think that if we can get the right end of the curve, the people who are the most productive, to at least replace themselves, then even if everything else goes bananas and we have like tons and tons, like unlimited people from the other side of the curve, it'll be okay. We'll survive that. The ability of the people on the right end of the curve to be astonishingly productive is just it's underestimated a lot of the time. But the problem is they're not replacing themselves. And I think in terms of, this, someone brings up eugenics in the chat. I think that eugenics is a non-starter, and I'm defining eugenics as state intervention in people's reproductive affairs. What I would rather have is an effort to have more, to facilitate more reproduction on the top end. And both make sure that people understand sociologically that it's their responsibility, and then also try to incentivize it in any way that is possible. And that's where I'm kind of torn between two options. One of which is more of a separate a separate sphere where more is controlled and where the message can be managed, and just trying to shift things a little bit in this culture, because like I say, people are not really pounding on that. On that subject, it's not a place where a lot of effort is being put, and if a few people can actually like really grind their axe on that, then I think that a big change can happen. And remember, we can draw to outs if we have enough time. Then we can draw to outs. Among our outs are embryo selection. Embryo selection could change everything. Oocyte maturation, making it so that people can just have much more reproductive capacity than they can now to a later age. That would also change things. So if we can hold things together long enough, then we can be rescued by some technological shift, though that's unlikely to happen at this point because we're running the clock too fast.
Kyle, we've had eugenics. We've had eugenics since 1973. It's called Roe v. Wade. And anybody that thinks that Roe v. Wade and abortion on demand, where women are allowed to kill their children, or they have somebody else kill them for them, is not thinking too clearly. That's exactly what that is. And that goes to part of the issue, talking about who's not reproducing. I would venture to say it's not just propaganda. It's not just the welfare state. There's also the economic picture as well. When you wipe out the middle class, it's kind of hard to have the right people producing.
Yeah, that, and Axios did a story this summer about all the jobs created after the banks went belly up in 2008. 80% of jobs are gig jobs. When you have a baby to feed at home, you need to be able to count on your income. because that baby needs to be fed if you're a man who can be man of the house. If a man of the house who puts in the sweat and the work can't count on being paid because the nature of employment has shifted to at-will contract gig rather than, where there's actual rights for people who work because we respect our working classes and our middle classes because they're the backbone that makes everything work, we're screwed. So Kyle makes a lot of good points, but just because there's a welfare state, that is the state. The state doesn't need to rule by sticks. It actually rules much more effectively when it uses a lot of carrots. And if you give carrots to single women who have very few breaks in their consumption, just it's female nature. I mean, it's a good part of female nature, but if you weaponize it against, family and community stability by just handing out welfare like candy, you will get the bottom end sinking all of society because people at the top end tend to be people that want very high investment in their children. And if you take resources from them and give them to people at the bottom end, the people at the top are demoralized, they drop out of society, and the whole thing burns to the ground of its own inertia. So getting policies right is essential. So ending no-fault divorce, ending the divorce court racket, the relief program, feminist psychology bullshit, getting rid of welfare to single mothers. Yes, single mothers, like Turd Flinging Monkey says, are going to consume their young. It's going to be terrible, but we can't let more families die and let more good men drop out of wanting to form families because they know their resources will be stolen, not allowed to be used for their kids and be given to people, particularly women who've not been so damn responsible, and the men who just are nothing more than sperm donors. So I'm sorry, a pro-family policy, because, the millennials just aren't forming kids and they need some stability. If you form a family, I am in favor of kind of the stuff that Hungary has done, Poland is tinkering around with. We will give a family that, a woman stays home, raises 3 or 4 kids. We cut their income taxes big time, and we probably give cash injections to people doing good things for society because there's value to pro-social behavior that we need to match to monetary benefits outside of just crass commercialism. Because the key in society is bare life. That's what's important, not goods and trinkets and baubles and all this other crap. I mean, consumerism has just made our society ugly and horrible. I mean, the constant fight. Going into corporate jobs, having to smile all day while you just sell people shit they probably really don't need to be happy, but you're doing it anyway just to put, food on your table, but then not get a culture that makes you have a dinner table with an actual family at the same time. Not acceptable. So welfare to single mothers.
One thing that I would say that can help us clarify the issues we're facing is that Japan is in a worse place than us in terms of fertility patterns, and so is China, Korea, and even Eastern Europe has extremely low birth rates, and so it has to be something that is happening to all
Rodney,
of
can you
us.
please mute?
And so, yeah, what is happening to all of us? Well, all of us have changed technology. We've all been provided the pill. We've all been provided with birth control. But then, in addition to that, we've all changed the vision of an ideal life. If you are someone who gets to live their life as they choose, we've changed that towards, go get a huge education, including women. Go get spend a lot of time getting educated, and then build your career as early as possible, and really get yourself onto that social ladder. And that perspective is one that makes it so that people who drop out of society have all the time in the world to have kids, but those who are on the who meet the societal ideals, well, they're almost neutered, right? They can have children, but it starts really late, and that's a problem. Also, the demoralization factor that Japan and Eastern Europe, they're both very demoralized places with a very sort of dark view of their future in a sense, and also a very depressed vibe. That's also a problem. We need light in people's lives. We need the idea of a positive future. But overall, I think that one of the places to focus is just the sociology of our elite. We make it so that the correct path, quote unquote, is incompatible with large families, and we need to organize things exactly the opposite. A simple fix might be let people have children before they go to college, like Sandra Day O'Connor did, and then they can have a career that's uninterrupted after they finished, raising their children to relative independence. Then they can start their career full bore and be able to be uninterrupted in that sprint. And so that seems to me like a bug fix in a way that maybe could be practical. Another thing is just changing the sociology. Like one thing that's absolutely killing us is that people view children as these absolutely fragile and incredibly horrendously expensive creatures who you're going to have to wait on hand and foot and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on college, and that's just not true. Like you can get by with a lot less. I'm not saying to abuse your kids or to neglect them, but people need to understand that the children can be companions in life who are not a burden, and that this attempt to help kids by making them out to be this gigantic investment of all your money and all your time, it doesn't help them. People need to treat their kids like they're less fragile. Take them to work, take them wherever you want. Treat them relatively. Give them responsibilities, and don't be afraid to do that. Don't be afraid of your children, and don't think that you have an obligation to spend zillions of dollars on college education for them. And push comes to shove, there are ways around that. Go ahead.
Kyle, just to piggyback, this goes to one of the other panelists' discussion about consumerism. Millennials and even some Gen Xers like me, not me, of course, I've done my fair share of child rearing, but they are making the conscious decision to have iPhones at $1,000 or $1,200, Nike tennis shoes at $400 or $500. Than to have children. Yeah. They seem to be put. And then when you see these couples, these millennial couples pose for their Instagram selfies, they're holding their little poodle puppy that they literally hold out as equivalent to having a child. So this all flows from culture. And as far as welfare, it has ceased being a carrot or candy. It's become crack cocaine to everybody, and everybody has wanted a little taste of it. So it's going to take a fundamental reordering of the social system, which is why I was hoping back in 2008 and 2009 that Congress would keep log jamming at a deadlock, and the crash would have been much broader than it was. I was hoping that Congress would not do the bailout, would not do TARP, because we needed that type of Weimar-like crash in the United States to reorder society and to address these issues that we're talking about. As long as people are pumping crack cocaine in the form of welfare cash and welfare programs, you are not going to have a fundamental reordering of society and to reestablish proper cultural norms.
Yeah, good point there, Rodney. Really appreciate you bringing that all together. I mean, I think it's important to remember that all state intervention is a form of eugenics/dysgenics, right? So Kyle was saying earlier he doesn't want the state interfering with the process of creating new families, but the existence of a welfare state in the first place is doing just that. So it's sort of inevitable. I just want to bring the conversation back to Duvid because I feel like he's being left out of his own show, and since this week in review, and Duvid want to make sure we give him a special position in the ranks. So Duvid, did you want to take over, maybe give your thoughts and direct the conversation where you'd like it to go next?
It's the coercive measures that people object to.
Yeah, it was kind of phasing out there, like I guess whatever you guys were talking about. I'm not sure if you want to you'll get kind of like week in review, kind of a progression of ideas, anything that looks like it's interesting on the horizon, or your experience in streaming, besides for like all of you guys are thinkers and philosophers and political commentators and could go on and on about countless topics, but more just in the realm of the streamosphere and the rise and fall of characters, tricks of the trade.
Duvid, what kind of cigarette were you smoking? Was it a natural American spirit?
It was a pipe and medical marijuana.
Well, I was toking on a stream last night, and a lot of people overheard it because I forgot to mute myself, and frankly, every once in a while, if I'm really, really stressed and I'm struggling to eat a little bit, I'm thin, I'm pretty vatic. Marijuana increases my appetite to keep me focused on eating. When I'm stressed, I don't eat well, or at least I don't eat a lot. And the whole
That's a good
stream
use
with
for it, actually. So is this the
yeah,
stoners corner? Is this the weed section? Is that why you guys are so much nicer than the the average around here?
could be.
I
Yeah,
think
otherwise, yeah, I mean, otherwise it might be more difficult to kind of just space out and let the other people do the talking, because it's hard to not assert yourself and
I
just
think it's definitely good
meditate for
for
like 30 minutes,
keeping
15
people
minutes,
chill
and
in a sense.
let all
Josh
these other
Randall.
people, and there might have been I could
I'm
have
on
said
uppers, I'm
interesting
on
points and
caffeine,
counterpoints
so
and
kind of the
questions or
opposite.
insights on countless things that you guys said, but it's like, okay, whatever, so let's just let you guys talk and space out, so we could be helpful for that. But it's hard to direct these streams and to have conversations and keep them flowing, and when you have multiple panelists and multiple people in the audience that all desire to talk or hear about different things. I mean, I was talking about my research and in a topic we talk about pretty often in just cognitive dissonance and possibly the relation to free will. And you're saying if
Weed
these
does explain some things about
meta-analysis, that there's
Duvit's
certain
contributions.
huge overarching societal factors, and it's causing mass cognitive dissonance on everybody.
Vincere
And
Autumni.
there's just a
Oh,
natural
Art Mori says during the run up to the next election, more and more voices will be silenced via censorship as left desperately tries to control the narrative.
and it could lead to
Perhaps,
dual personality.
but it seems like Facebook is resisting that process.
Or
Vincere.
even not just having an internet personality, but even dual personalities in real life where they act completely differently around different people. There might be genetic and all these various predispositions, and then it's just so is that a assessment of the current situation that we're all facing equally, even though we have different opinions and approaches and interpretations of it. So that's why I was more interested in
Yeah,
what we
Kane,
call
that
here
does
the
explain a lot.
meta-analysis, and just looking at like how do people deal with the dissonance, and can we diagnose these larger dissonances out that they're affecting masses of people, and just interpret the different strategies that people use to solve their dissonance.
Have you ever read Irving Goffman?
Seems to be
David?
interested in dissonance, older
No,
testosterone.
I don't think so.
That much.
Yeah,
I've
he's someone you should consider
plucked.
reading, because he touches on dissonance from a slightly different perspective. Irving Goffman is a sociologist who was trained at University of Chicago back when the University of Chicago had a very empirically minded sociology department. So I'm talking the 30s and the 40s. I mean, University of Chicago is kind of like the last golden gem of American academia, and even it is really cracking badly, because I went to an event there this past week where the level of discussion was so piss poor, it was sad. But anyway,
I just wanted to answer Kyle's question about whether this is the smoker's corner. I've noticed, just to give a bit of a meta-analytical perspective here through my sojourn on the internet, which has lasted coming up on 5 years now, I do seem to find a lot of people are, I don't know if they're like career potheads, but they do have some experience with it. They're sympathetic to it. A lot of people seem to have experience with psychedelics as well. Sort of depends on the person. I try to have enforce a ban on the promotion of degeneracy. So, like, I don't like people coming on drunk on the stream, or maybe like promoting drugs as a lifestyle type thing. But I think just the topics we cover, it does sort of put us in the same general camp as people who are interested in exploring consciousness, which is often facilitated through drugs. So you have to take, I think it's important to take a nuanced stance on drugs. There is, excuse me, a role for them. We do have cannabinoid receptors in our brains. It's just a question of what is proper role, and that's something we explore often on the show. So I just want to give that little background to Kyle there. I can hand it back over to you, David. Are there any subjects that
I
you
have
want
a
to
question on that.
Yeah, it seems like the
you have a question.
psychedelic
Okay, go
/ weed
ahead.
corner
Yeah,
is
talking about
more
drugs, I've
better than
noticed
the
that too,
alcohol
particularly
corner.
in the dissident right, where the dissident right's position on drugs is almost indistinguishable from that of the left and even the extreme left. And I just want, I think as a society, we are over-drugged as it is. I go to the VA hospital and or
Yep.
a VA clinic
Rodney's
for
right.
medical care, and the first thing they want to do is send a whole bunch of high-potency opioids without even you go in for just a simple sprain, and they're ready to just throw the most heavily enhanced narcotic at you, and they send them. Believe it or not, the government prescribers send opioids through the mail to people's houses. That is
honestly,
a fact.
alcohol and opioids
So
and
I'm just
cocaine
wondering, is
seem like
this really,
and
if we're going to talk
meth
about societal change
seem a lot
in
more
these
worrying than
streams, is that
psychedelics and weed
what
by a lot.
distinguishes the alt-right or the dissident right from the left on a lot of these core issues, and I have found there is little to distinguish the two. And now I understand there is a medicinal value to cannabis in terms of cancer patients. I've seen that with members of my own family. They're particularly in the eating situation when they're going through chemo. But I think this legalization effort of recreational use, I don't think that's going to be good for society in the long term.
Well, you have to understand that prohibition increases consumption due to the forbidden fruit complex that a lot of people have, where they'll be more likely to engage in a behavior because it's illegal. Incidentally, this is the reason why Claire Kaw's whipping sluts plan is little more than a realization of a gamma female BDSM fetish. But yeah, I mean, it's a bad
She
thing.
believes that? She believes that?
Let's not go there right now. I was just making a little joke for the long-time listeners. The way I think we have to learn to look at statecraft
Claire Kaw
is
an interesting
that
character.
we can't really stop people from wanting to hurt themselves if that's really what they want to do. Like, in yoga, there's all these grand sweeping statements about all of life is suffering. And there is truth to that. But there's levels of suffering, right? There's the suffering you get from an opioid addiction versus the suffering you get from a cigarette withdrawal or marijuana withdrawal, if you can call it that, right? So the way we look at it is people are going to do this stuff. How can we set up the incentive structure so that they're doing it in a way that's minimally harmful? Because we sort of accept that we can't really meaningfully stop people's will to hurt themselves until they're willing to kind of say, yeah, I'm done suffering. Clearly, there's some role. Clearly, there's some role for drugs, right? But drugs, just like sexuality, can't be your core identity. That's the degenerate thing. Sorry, go ahead, Rodney.
I was just using, I'll just wrap up on this, the example, since it was legalized in California and in the state of Nevada, states that I have experience with, I have personally saw families walking down the sidewalk with their small children. I'm using the example at a hotel waiting for their car to be brought up from valet. And these, I know you use the term potheads. I don't know if everybody that uses cannabis is a pothead. I'm not sure I'm willing to go there, but they're sitting there on the sidewalk smoking cannabis. And then you have the smoke around these, and that, I see that the mother very nice and cordially asks them, hey, if my kids are here, and they become absolutely, and these were two young men in suits and ties. I mean, you'd think that they would be educated and have some degree of social norms. And they became very militant and belligerent at being asked to, hey, not be smoking a blunt there and blowing the smoke around small children. And that's what I
thought this
talk
was
about.
America.
How far do we want to take this? Yeah, exactly. Get your kids out of here and accommodate my addiction. And what I've been seeing, and keep in mind, there's lots of addictions. I mean, I used to be laughed at for smoking a cigarette and drinking a mixed drink on Luke Ford's show, which I don't do anymore out of medical necessity. But certainly that's the same thing, no different than a sloshing
You should come
drunk
back and do it.
being belligerent. I might do it just once, just to troll people. But I got nothing else to lose on it. But I'm just wondering, as a society, I mean, it just appears that some people begin to be defined by their vices, and that's not limited to homosexuals.
Yeah, I think that's the forbidden fruit part, right? The part where you become cool because you flaunted the societal norm. And in a way, it becomes like this race where at a certain point, it seems like you're a coward if you don't partake, right? That's the destructive element of it. Though I do believe that prohibition does reduce use in general, it does also create, along with the societal disapproval, it creates this game where you're like those Russians, those Russian parkour people, where it's like, oh well here I'm showing my cred by doing this. And that's not how it used to be, right? There used to be a time when it was disapproved, but it also didn't give you cred to do it. And that's what we seem to have a problem with right now. I can't think of anything really that we disapprove of, that you don't get cred for doing at this point, right? That we've
that's
lost.
the problem with mainstreaming queerness. It turns into absurdity. What evidence do you have that prohibition diminishes consumption, though, of drugs? It seems to be
For
the
instance,
opposite.
just during the alcohol prohibition, like things like liver cirrhosis went down in incidence, and also in Muslim countries, the alcohol consumption rate is pretty low compared to in the West. So those are two data points there.
But the problem with that analogy, Kyle, is the United States during Prohibition began to resemble what Mexico is going through with rival gangs and mafias shooting at each other in the street and killing innocent bystanders. So the savings you got off the booze, you you more than made up with Tommy guns because society began fighting over it. I also am against using jails and the criminal justice system to address some of these issues. That costs far more than some of the alternatives. I think throwing somebody in jail for a drug addiction is absolutely ludicrous.
It's also barbaric, sadistic, because drug users are a public health problem if they're not committing violence or property crime. Drug pushers, however, and this is a different issue. This is why Duterte, for instance, is so wildly popular in the Philippines, because the methamphetamine epidemic there in the decade before he became president, it was so out of control, causing so much violence, so much chaos that Philippine cities were like war zones. And that's why the central thing he ran on was, if he says it openly, if you push drugs, I will kill you. He says that on the podium. And he has 80 steady in Frontline did a documentary showing, he's so violent, violating all these human rights, and liberal activist groups in the UN and the EU are constantly complaining. Even Obama tried to complain about him. His approval rating has stayed about 85%, and criminals are being liquidated, and people are happy with it. Why? People need order. You can't have gangs with Tommy guns shooting each other over who's going to do drugs or sell drugs. You can't selling drugs in this kind of environment tends to empower the worst kinds of people, and you can't allow it.
I don't want the United States to become what Mexico has become. It's bad. Look at, like you said, go back and use the example of those two mothers and all their children that were gunned down. We're not far from that if we continue these absolute idiotic and insane policies.
I'll just put an article in the chat there that indicates that there was an 18% decrease in drug consumption when it was decriminalized in Portugal. So maybe it's more complex of an issue, and I appreciate you bringing that to my attention, Kyle. I do support a full decriminalization of marijuana for sure, because I think that's the least damaging of all the mind-altering substances. So people might as well be doing the best version of that they can get, and then possibly other things in the event of people having more serious afflictions on a case-by-case basis. I'm not saying we can solve everything with weed. I'm just saying,
at this point, I would support full legalization, not because I don't think that there are problems with weed, but because at this point it's like halfway done, and so that creates like a terrible situation where people are half in, half out. It's felt that it's not any sort of violation, but then in some places it is, some places it isn't. Like you had that Elon Musk thing, where he smoked a blunt, and then the federal government was after him a little bit for that. It's just it becomes a mismatch, a mishmash of policies, and at this point, just legalize the whole thing. I think because this mix, this half in, half out stuff is destructive, and it doesn't make logical sense to people. And laws, part of the job of the law is to protect you, but another part of the job of the law is to be legible and understandable by normal people.
Yeah, good point, Kyle. Over to you, David. You want to take back over the conversation? Just want to make sure you get enough time to talk. I know you're feeling a little shy today.
Yeah, I guess I'm just letting you guys talk because you seem to be on a different topics than our regular week in review topics. So I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to connect what you guys are talking about to our regular. So, just interesting to hear you guys.
Well, I think the best way to connect it is this dissonance that there is between opinions about homosexuality and drug consumption. And maybe we're getting closer to actually having a defensible position on that, because I think a lot of people have positions that aren't 100% defensible.
Well, you don't have to have a position. The dissonance is when you have higher level rules conflicting with your sense perception. So if you have higher level rules that say this is bad or this is this is good or this is bad, and then you have dissonance because what you see in reality doesn't correspond to what you believe is the way the world should function. And then saying if the current state of reality, basically everybody is dealing with this on various levels. You could try to say I have no rules, nothing surprises me. Could be anything. But that's not the way humans function. Everyone has to develop these higher level rules to guide all the data that's out there. So that's generally how I approach these issues, and just assuming like people are rational animals with levels of free will that they're gonna have the larger problems facing humanity or different sections of humanity, and there's just various strategies to deal with that. As opposed to Kyle, Rodney, or Luke, maybe are more like moralizers. I think JF was saying that when he had Greg Johnson on about Richard Spencer, where Greg Johnson was like, he's just a bad person, and where JF was like, I'm not a moralizer. Like I just didn't judge him like that. I didn't think about it. Like I don't actually have a sermon to give. I don't have like all the opinions on the various hot issues of the day.
If he's not a moralizer, why do you tell me to have babies on his show?
Who?
JF.
For the ethno state.
Also, but I was saying in that respect, like whether it's homosexuality or any of these issues, you say he's not a moralizer. Whether personally, like I would recommend the action or not, and then some sort of reality would say, well, I'm not the person who makes the rules. So either there's some sort of divine karma where there's a separate force, God, that rewards or punishes, or there's just kind of a working reality that these things don't work out. Or if you're complaining that it seems like that karma is rigged against you, like in a certain way, that what shouldn't be working is working. So how are you going to deal with that if everything tells you it shouldn't work, but then you open your eyes and it's like, well, how come this thing that everything I know tells me shouldn't work appears to be working awesomely? So that's just the dissonance that everybody's facing.
MM over
here. So Duvidism's more kind of just
JF is an interesting question. Right?
As long as you don't have strong attachment.
Is not really a moralizer. He's more of a libertarian, but he has shifted more into the sort of standard dissident right politics.
Rodney with their long moralizing and analysis of these various issues, or even like kind of thought patrolling where you're trying to convince people it's better to be on one side of an issue than the other, and they'll put you in a situation to be more caught up in things and to have excessive amounts of dissonance because you have a stake in one side of the issue winning out over the other.
Right. It would be nice not to have a stake. It would be nice to have no stake at all, but one is forced to if one cares about the ultimate outcome. And JF is sort of more of a long-term thinker, right? He says, "I care about the next 5,000 years. I don't care about this one little step." But I think that the problem is, similar to the selection shadow, the longer you go out in time, the less relevant your predictions are. And so I think that we need to get people focused on what I was talking about, the family, on top end reproduction, and on making people have healthy attitudes towards children. That I think is really does change the future, and everything that you build in the next 5,000 years is built upon what we do in the next 100.
I like that.
Yeah, I'm just trying to say, like, okay, if that's how you feel, you should just act upon it yourself, like Rodney or something, build up a family. I don't know, like we and creating a movement. And even if it comes down to, like, not necessarily that I disagree with you, just about an understanding for how reality works. And are you correctly interpreting your reality in your place in reality, that you're like, we need to do something in order to change your greater society where a more proper perspective about how things operate and how it's capable, how us as individuals or even actively collectively could potentially change these things.
Right. Like the question is, should you address questions of like idealized societal paths if you're not in a position to change that path yourself? And I think the answer is yes, because the exercise is one that builds character and builds knowledge about the world. It's difficult to build knowledge and build expertise on subjects without a sort of overarching goal that you're driving towards. And so I think that yeah, like my ability to change the course of history is negligible at this point. But nevertheless, it makes sense for me to think about the course of history and think about how the course of history may be changed. It's an exercise which improves the person who engages in it, in my view.
I actually agree with Kyle again. I think that's very.
It's the LARPing question.
Well, I don't disagree with you, but I'm talking about like week in review and like your streaming type thing, and it's saying, okay, there's a lot of different value propositions within streaming, but promoting like greater worldviews or utopian visions, as opposed to current practical information, and even on a longer scale, okay, like Duvid and Jennifer are more scientists or theologians, and we're trying to solve these historical philosophical questions and develop the ideas, and looking over hundreds of years, lifetimes and lifetimes of the greatest minds have been thinking and working on these issues. It's not like we're the first person just to wake up and realize that these are heavy issues facing humanity, that in reality, most of the issues facing our current generation are at least related to, if not the same, issues that have faced every generation, and the greatest minds of each generation had their various opinions on the best way to deal with that. And you could be
I'm reminded of the time you talked about Epstein in the context of the old ladder, the temple prostitutes of old, to sort of make that point. Things don't really change. It's just a matter of like what scale of things that you're looking at things on, what actually makes sense.
You think evolution, I was just listening to these lectures on plant biology where they call it like plastic, like leaves or something, that they could, leaves could, in terms that they use evolve, but manifest themselves in many different ways. And good ideas, even mediocre ideas sometimes, or people have many
Kane, I don't think that
different ways of
conservatism is a
manifesting
burden.
largely
I think it's
the same thing. If that's
it's a pretty
racial
functional
or
movement, and
various
it needs to be
forms
improved
of,
in certain
how
ways.
these
But
ideas get
it's
created
a
and
start.
spread through the streamosphere.
It's better that it exists
and
than
then
it doesn't
manifested,
exist.
Molded in a different adaptive way to fit the environment that they're operating in.
Cool, well said. So I don't know where we want to take this next. Have we covered all the stuff that's happened this week, or was there anything else that people wanted to go into and analyze? Because I could play my appearance on Luke's if people want to see it. It's about 8 minutes.
Yeah, I would just maybe if Kyle or Gandalf.
Rodney, I'll let you say any last words if you want to, but I really appreciate you coming on. And this is a more like we can review with you.
Trying to get them more philosophical than political.
Maybe Rodney, you can come on at a different time and we can have a longer discussion. Hello? I don't know if he's still there. He's still in the chat, but I can't hear him.
Yeah, I'm looking at the side chat.
Yeah. Well, thanks for coming, Rodney. Nice to meet you. And sorry, back over to you, Duvid.
Yeah, Rodney, I guess hopefully he'll be around. He's been around for a while. He's almost semi-professional in media.
Kane Marco says you can replace conservatism with anything. Just imagine someone telling you that you must adopt all the ideas of your enemies. That's conservatism. I disagree, Kane Marco. I think conservatism holds the line on a number of issues, and actually holds power. And so, in those two ways, it's better than like the dissidents who don't have any material impact.
To produce logical proofs to his political and social opinions. I don't know how applicable that was to like Week in Review and is it trying to keep it more philosophical or meta-analysis.
I think maybe he's just excited to come on a stream again. Has he actually been on a stream recently, or is this
not
the first
for months?
Time back?
This was the first time back. Well, he went on Luke Ford's stream earlier today, but then on yours, and yeah, it's great to have Rodney back. I wasn't sure if he would come back, but it was a welcome addition.
Well, you got Luke Ford's co-host Kyle here, so if you want to talk about the Luke Spear, you want to play and go over your appearance on Luke, like I could mute myself and you could play your explanation about what's going on here in the Week in Review.
Yeah, awesome. I just clipped the part of the show where I was mentioning Week in Review and various people in the spheres, so I'll get that ready and we can talk about it after. It's about 8 minutes. So hang on. It's just going to take me a minute to find it. I think I might have forgot to add it to my list there. Just give me a minute,
Can you guys talk for a minute while I get this set up? Sorry, I thought I had it.
Sure. I've been thinking about making a couple of videos. One on like 3 categories of activity that you can divide the powerful into, and another on power dynamics and the red pill, and how the red pill is a generalized explanation of how things work when relationships are fraught with the chance of betrayal, and with a chance of trading up. But yeah, like the first one of those, I think that it's productive to think of things in terms of the productive version and the scam. So one category of activity that you gain recognition and power and money for is managing reputations. So in its productive version, it's giving credentials and a good reputation to people who do good works. And in its unproductive version, it's saying, well, if you don't pay us, we're going to destroy your reputation. It's like a protection racket. Then there's a literal protection racket, like the army, the police. They protect you. They protect you from outside danger, but they also are a protection racket in the sense that if you don't pay them, then they will become the danger. And then a third category is sort of a grab bag category of like merchants providing all sorts of goods and services, where the good side is obviously all the material wealth that you can accumulate, but the bad side is like planned obsolescence, software as a service, trying to drag you out, string you along, and force you into an ecosystem and just sell you plain bad stuff. And I think that
Awesome,
those three...
Kyle. I really look forward to that, to those further developments on your channel. So if you don't mind putting your channel in the chat, and people can subscribe to that if they want to tune in. Kyle's got some great live streams. I've got the video queued up, so if everyone doesn't mind muting, and we'll come back in just about 8 minutes.
Great.
Thanks for filling the dead air there.
All right, let's see. What are we missing? She might not be giving it to the Hangout, right? She might be just sending the audio to the stream. So let's see.
Just a troll. So it's different if you're like a
stride there as well, because there's people in my audience who actually really like what David says. I know this audience, he's a little more controversial around these here parts. But,
I don't even know what he said, but he's fucking dumb.
Oh, come on now.
I don't even know what his like stance is on anything.
Haven't you seen the size of his library? But
this is Bob.
Like,
this is Zoomer code? Bob here.
No, it's a literal library.
Zoomer Bob returns.
Oh,
I don't want to play favorites, Luke, but there's just too many good people to even mention, to be honest. But yeah, I do have that weekly show with David. So if you'd like to see more David, subscribe to Church of Entropy.
Josh Randall.
How many shows have
Older
you done with
Testosterone. Ann Coulter.
Oh my gosh, I think we're
has
coming
been
up
pissing
on
me
30
off lately. She's been
reviews.
like attacking Stephen Miller and
It's
Trump
been great.
himself a lot.
It's just so smooth.
And it
like,
seems to me like she
somehow-
doesn't understand the limits of anti-immigration policy. She thinks that that's the whole political spectrum. But Miller and Trump are like two of the most anti-immigration politicians you're going to have in a long time. And she doesn't understand that, it seems.
Madame Ka, and it's a very complicated situation that I've had to explain a few times over the last few days. But essentially, I'm just not going to take a break of indeterminate length from Claire Ka is what my position is at this point. I think you might have done the same thing a while back,
Yes.
Luke.
Yeah, she's challenging. She does not hold by normal protocols of human interaction, so it can be challenging to deal with Claire. And then you've also got Elliot Blatt on your show, who's quite sharp, quite a smart guy. How would you describe Elliot?
I call Elliot King Kappa because he has that creamy Vedic archetype of like the heavier set person, but who's also spiritually heavier set. So he has these extremely detailed and sort of well thought out opinions. And he's also sort of in touch with things on the emotional side, so he can give these really insightful takes about the drama side of things.
I've seen Elliot Blatt around a little bit.
Just live for drama.
I'm not sure exactly what his
Luke, you might be
position
one
is.
of those people. I accept people the way they are. I think that's one of my strengths, is like seeing, like just focusing on people's strengths. And that was what I was kind of doing with Claire, because she has like, as a streamer, she has good qualities, but they're kind of
Okay, Josh is just joking about Richard Spencer being in the chat lurking while people talk about him.
Jen, how did you get Brundle on your show? When I remembered from the chat, you guys hated each other.
Oh my gosh, how much time you got?
All night.
I knew when you banned him in your chat, but you had said earlier on the stream, I can't quit you, Brundle. I knew you were sad. And it's weird because it's the same with my guys. Like, they all just really like him. I tried to ask them, like, what is it about him that you're just like, it's like a man crush or something. As a woman, I can't, like, I don't really get it. Maybe you could tell me. Why is he still on your mind after all this time?
Oh, he's very good. He's very good at live streaming. He's very brutally honest with his opinions. He has less of a filter between what he's thinking and what he says than most people. So he's honest. He's authentic. He's funny. He's intelligent, and he's a terrific partner for a live stream. He's the type of guy who could hold down a radio show, syndicated radio show. I think he's just very gifted.
Don't you think there's something about his personality that's just sort of daring people to, I don't want to say to fight, but maybe to debate a little bit?
Yeah, no, he's an instigator. Yeah, he's an instigator, right?
Yeah, so I guess I just got tired of fighting with me, honestly. It sort of went on for like 8 months. I don't know if you saw any of the Claire Cost streams where he was going on there after things fell out with you.
Yeah, he and Trish Menderby were on really bad terms.
Well, if you really
he
want
made like
to know,
a video
that might
making
give more
fun of
background,
her,
but yeah, essentially,
her body.
I guess we buried the hatchet.
Stuff like that.
How, though? Because, I mean, he said like really nasty things about you, and you were pretty stern back.
Oh, there's Kyle fan.
How does someone get back from that angry place to where you're civil again?
I was never angry, just sad. I mean, I guess emotions are things you can kind of run out of. Sort of get tired of hatred, like any other emotion, like love.
Brundle has
and then
seemed
you
tired.
just sort of settle into some other
not that I've seen him that much.
quantum state. I honestly couldn't tell you exactly. Like, I kind of feel like maybe we both just changed. I think Elliot, actually, to come back to Elliot, he described it as us having made shifts to our approach.
Brundlefly. They're talking about Brundlefly, Josh.
Avoid whatever it was causing
Brundlefly and Jen's relationship.
And Davis Orini, what's going on with him? How would you describe him?
He was actually one of the first live streamers, possibly. No, that was Chris Cantwell, that I ever followed. And he goes way back. He was a lot more like Styx Hexenhammer back in the day. Like, there's videos of him with
Styx
black
Hexenhammer
eyeliner and stuff. And he's done some
Anyone
great
here a fan of
controversial
them?
stuff. And I know, Forney, and he's associated with him, so you probably heard about that
Kyle
stuff.
fan is in a
and
casino.
I guess I
Win
just,
big, bro. Put it all
pretty
on
much
red.
like anyone else, I think he's got talent, and he's Canadian, so there's that bond, and he's an alpha male.
Don't be a pussy.
Sort of. And yeah, I was happy to have him on, and because he lost his YouTube channel, unfortunately, a while back. So I like to try to help people out, build their audience back up, especially if they're still producing content, and it's basically getting harder and harder. So it's an honor to meet him.
And what's he doing these days?
I think it's just more of the same, just sort of like a lot of us are just adjusting our sails to deal with these new circumstances, like asking ourselves what's the best way to produce under these less than optimal circumstances. I know he's doing some streams on Twitch there, so you can look up David Stream if you want to follow him. And it's just more of the same, monologuing, but it's always engaging. I guess it's my kind of thing.
And what have been the joys and challenges of working with David?
His image, especially the shaved head and gogoatee, bear a remarkable and probably intentional resemblance to Kane.
We have a lot in
Kane
common,
lives.
in the sense that he has a lot of Jewish detractors, and I have a lot of Goyish detractors. So we kind of have that, like, it's almost like we're getting attacked and we're like both backing up, and we're just like, our backs are like up against each other's backs, kind of. That's the feel. That's how I feel about David. And
Kane lives.
I don't even know if the challenge would be that he can upset other people, like with Elliot. I'm disappointed that we couldn't make that work, but I guess I wasn't sensitive enough to that conflict. And so unfortunately there is a bit of drama, but I'm sort of used to people being a bit, like, big egos tend to have big
I like
personality
sticks,
conflicts.
Heinrich.
So there's not too much of a challenge with Duvid. I guess it's just like keeping the panel under control, because a lot of times people want to bring their personal drama, and we're trying to keep it as a focused week in review type. Like, he has a very specific vision of what he wants it to be, so that's the challenge, I guess.
And what are your favorite topics on the Week in Review?
I don't know. I see myself more as a facilitator. So if I get that vibe that something's really clicking for someone, or someone's having a lot of success, that's kind of why I do it. There's basically nothing I want for myself other than to see other people.
Hey guys, we're back. Thanks so much for
so that they can
hanging
realize
out
that
for that brief interlude. I hope everyone enjoyed that. Did you get to see it, Duvid? Duvid, you're muted. But if you want to
Duvid.
Oh, he's just putting his earphones back on.
Yeah,
we haven't heard
That's
from Mike
right.
in a
Yeah,
while.
good job.
Mike, sorry, go ahead, Duvid.
Yeah, good job. I was a little surprised. Oh, sorry. Jump right in there and say, like, some of the major topics, like quantum consciousness, hard problem consciousness, e-celebrities, rise and fall debate. That you were like, you don't know when he asks you what are the common topics.
Well, I don't know. I didn't feel like I could.
Duvid is the.
I know what the topics are. I
everybody
know
with
what
the
the
multiple
topics
truth
are. It's
hypothesis.
quantum consciousness. I know. I just wasn't on my best game there because I wasn't expecting the invite, and I didn't have any preparation. And he was asking, like, Luke asked pretty tough questions, honestly. Like, he's put me on the spot probably more. I don't want to say more than anyone else, but he's top 5.
He dredges deep. He considers himself a man who dredges deep in interviews. He doesn't let anything, any of that juice go unsqueezed.
You did well, though.
Oh, I mean, thank you.
Yeah, you did well. I heard about.
There wasn't anything outside of the ordinary. No one thought you were weird or whatever.
Well, that's a first.
On the hard problem of consciousness, I recently listened to a Rationally Speaking podcast. And I don't know if you guys have heard that podcast, but this philosopher was on talking about it. And the way that he put it was, he's an illusionist. He just says that sense that you have of the irreducibility of your conscious experience is an illusion, and that just squares the circle right there. But I don't know what you guys think about that.
Well, there's a lot to it. I'm saying that, like, that might be insightful, or different ways of getting to it. But obviously, it's an extremely complicated topic that there's all different aspects: the philosophical, the scientific, the theological, your relationships to things like reincarnation, free will, and so it's a continuing topic. You could have a weekly stream just talking about that, alone.
Well, if the answer is that consciousness is an illusion, then we have to ask ourselves, what's the nature of the illusion, etc., etc. But to say that consciousness is an illusion is it's a bit of wallpapering over it, right?
Right, and the way he approached the subject was to say, like, the part I'm talking about is the part where it's irreducible, right? The part where it's not where it's not reducible to something that's simply a mechanical set of bells and whistles flying off in your head, but instead is this thing that has to be analyzed on its own terms. And he says, we may discover, like, illusion modules, essentially, like modules in our brain which create that salience and that sense of immediacy of consciousness. But he doesn't mean, like, your thoughts He doesn't mean everything that you experience is an illusion. He means that, like, that sense of immediacy where your sense experience is unmediated by some other processes, that is itself an illusion specifically, not the general thing. And I think the people on acid talk about that as well, right? People who have taken a lot of psychedelics talk about how now their sense experience does not feel immediate, but instead they can actually sense the way that there's an intermediary force between what they feel and their experience of it.
Cool. Yeah, the way I approach it is through a quantum mechanical framework. So
one of the things about quantum mechanics is that waveforms are the total, they represent the total energy of the system, or the total amount of information that can be taken from a system. So it's more of a philosophy than a science, really. Like, you have to actually sort of see where the quantum is and see, like, within the quantum, you can break it down, but it's different because you brought up this idea about, what was the word you used? Reducible? No.
Yeah,
irreducible.
Irreducible.
Irreducible, right. So that's important, because one of the things we always come back to is that the personality is irreducible. Like, I can't saw your personality in half and have two meaningful entities, right? Because it's one thing. So that theme comes up a lot, and it's really useful. So I'm glad you brought that up, because I do actually think we can get pretty good in understanding consciousness. Better than anyone else, for sure. We may not be able to, quote unquote, solve the hard problem of consciousness, right? Because that's like literally getting the... Some people would argue you literally need the field equations for the mind itself, which there might just be some like limit to our own understanding as humans, where we're sort of, if we were like, the argument is basically, if we were simple enough that we could understand, if our systems were so simple that we understood them, we wouldn't, like, our consciousness wouldn't be complex enough to understand ourselves anymore. I don't know if that made sense. Sorry.
Right. But we run into that situation even well before that we reach that level of sophistication, right? Because right now our programs are so large as to be incomprehensible. And I was arguing about this with a friend as well. I think that point where our works became too complicated for us to understand was actually a lot earlier. And I talked about like PCs, like your PC. There are a lot of building blocks in there, the fundamental primitives that build it up. A lot of those were made by people who are now dead, right? Invented, built from the ground up by people who are now dead, and who you can't necessarily go back and understand what they thought, what they were thinking of when they built those things up. So, like, if you were to build from the ground up, you would not build the same PC that we have now, and it's not clear that we can understand, the complexity of the technology that we already have. But then we go a step further with neural networks, where we don't even understand the principles. We just have a very basic system which spits out from a black box all of these outputs, and we don't even have to understand the fundamentals at all, really. And that's yet another remove of understanding. But I think some people believe that, like, quantum computers plus these sorts of algorithms might result in us being able to see a lot deeper in terms of our predictions.
It's possible. I mean, there are classes of problems that quantum computers are already better at than their physical, or whatever you want to call the computers we have now, counterparts.
That's the quantum supremacy thing, right? Like, they're better at predicting themselves right now than a computer is. But I think that they're not big enough to do the Shor's algorithm and stuff like that. We need like zillions of qubits for that. So that's quite a ways away.
Do you know what the Gaussian elimination algorithm is?
No.
Well, it's something in algebra. It's very important. If you take any algebra course in university, you're going to have to learn what's called the Gaussian reproduction algorithm. And it's basically, you have some, it would take me probably an hour to explain what it is, but essentially we have a very hard time coding this algorithm into a computer.
Mm-hmm.
Because we can do it really easily, but the computer somehow we can't replicate what it is that we're doing to make the computer do it too. So,
well,
go ahead.
This has been a problem with self-driving cars. I mean, this Gaussian theorem you talk to gets into like the deep learning problem of artificial intelligence. And, like the deep learning it requires to deal with like all the roadside hazards that present almost immediately, like dealing with what goes on in a snowstorm or a pileup, so you don't basically get killed. I mean, that's a big issue in early winter months if like a storm happens, say, in the South, where they're not used to, their infrastructure handling it. Self-driving cars have been resistant to a lot of problems. I mean, someone like Andrew Yang, who I briefly, and actually Halsey more than anyone else, talked me out of him, so I give him more credit than anybody else. And that was on a stream I did with Duvid, of all things. Although I make a joke that Halsey owes me UBI anyway. But my point is, Yang does not understand consciousness. So when he talks about everything's going to be automated and how it's going to work, well, Yang doesn't understand AI. Yang, has all these political beliefs and nice policy proposals. He's wonky. I like all that, but Yang doesn't understand certain things. You can't have UBI with, open borders and endless money printing and huge monopolies and VAT taxes. I mean, Halsey and I basically concluded that together. It's not going to work. The math doesn't add up. I mean, you got to be very careful when you talk.
I actually
about,
covered that on my stream.
Intelligence, all that stuff.
That's been researched. The effects of immigration on UBI. That's not actually guaranteed that you're right on that one.
Yeah, I've seen both arguments. And when you consider what goes on with the incentives of the welfare state, I'm going to take one particular side on that, because I'm not so sure that we don't know whether people's motivations are to assimilate or not if we don't make them have buy-in up front. And UBI wouldn't make buy-in up front. I mean, societies require sacrifice. The newcomers, have to show that, well, do you really want to be part of this tribe or this group or this collective? What are you willing to give? I mean, my ancestors, were shot at in Europe and Japan. Were yours for this? I don't know.
Well, I think a good idea would be to start very small. If you started extremely small and you used it as a replacement for quantitative easing, right? Quantitative easing bails out these financial institutions. But if you were to just have like a small UBI which got big in times of economic depression, then that would make a lot more sense in a lot of ways. It would just put money into the pocket of people who will immediately spend it, and you can always reduce it later on. It would be like you could give that power to the Federal Reserve, and that might be practical, because they already have the power to create this money to bail out big financial institutions. You could give them the ability to just give a certain amount each month to people, and if there's inflation, then they just reduce that amount, because that's their mandate is to keep inflation down. And so at that point, there's no real downside, because once it reaches the point where you're debasing the currency, the Fed just cuts back as inflation hawks.
Well, just to point out, I put a link to the study in the chat. There's more studies of you're just hypothesizing and speculating about a correlation between immigration and basic income, but it has been studied, and there are different approaches to the connection between migration and universal basic income, or different approaches to dealing with it. So this link I put in the chat at least has the links and the major papers of people who have really thought about this issue, because it could be your speculation is not accurate.
Well, we don't know, because no one's really tried a UBI yet, have they? So we don't have the big experiment yet.
You have it in Alaska. Alaska has a certain time period. I think they got rid of the time period. Actually, Alaska for a period had a time period that you had to live there, and then they got rid of it. There's been areas of Europe or test cases or elements of UBI that have been tested. You could speculate a connection between current levels of welfare and putting that towards you like a UBI, but it is something that they're like. It's not like you're the first person to postulate about it. Like, people have been thinking about it for decades, and have also been thinking about the effects it might have on immigration or migration patterns.
Sure, yeah, but to my knowledge, never a case where like a country has a UBI where if you get into that country, you're guaranteed that UBI, right? That hasn't.
I think Germany even has. I think Germany has the fundamental right to the guarantee of a subsistence minimum.
I don't think they have a UBI. Maybe I'm wrong, but as far as I knew,
they don't have a UBI but they have a fundamental right to the guarantee of a subsistence minimum.
Right, like welfare or food stamps, stuff like that.
Yeah. Those in the U.S. are just programs, as opposed to declaring that it's a person's fundamental right to. So in the U.S. still, people might say healthcare is a right or whatever. Constitutionally, no, those haven't been declared rights. There's just been federal programs that have been enacted, as opposed to Germany has actually declared a fundamental right to have minimal sustenance.
Well, hold on. I mean, I agree. Like, that's a good point, David. But like where this emerged from German culture, if you go back to like pre-Christian times, is within kind of like, I guess, Odinic religion, there's a very strong stricture that everybody must be self-sufficient, or at least put effort toward that. But at the same time, society should watch out for the people at the bottom. So there's an implicit social contract that comes deep from within kind of like the Germanic worldview. And the problem is with now that Germany's kind of an open culture and there's lots of people that don't have that implicit social contract with how they look at welfare and subsidy and whatnot, it risks delegitimizing what I think is a good pro-social trend. Lots of people see that, if I'm just going to get stuff, I'm just going to take. I mean, most people are not, just human nature. People go with what's easy rather than.
There's actually been whole places of India that have worked with UBI or Africa, but in those cases they really did like hardly over $1 a day or sometimes even less than that, and they were able to afford to attempt like UBI with even hundreds of thousands of people on a period time basis. I mean, but it's a complicated issue of migration, the push and pull factors. And UBI would be a pull factor, but generally push factors are more important in immigration than pull factors. So, if you want to correlate two things together where people are being forced to immigrate away from where they came from, and at the same time need a place to go, so that pull factor of I'm going to go to the places that gives me the most guaranteed minimums, or something might be a factor, but like in terms of people leaving to pick up and go, I think the evidence is lacking to show that many people would just pick up to go because they feel that they might have more money or more economic opportunity in a place like that. That's a much smaller percentage of migrants.
Yeah, I broadly agree. It's not a showstopper that it would be too much of a draw for immigration, in my opinion, at least. But I think it does get worse if it is too generous, right? And I think that a fix at $1,000 a month is too much, and it's also
but not for America. You're saying in a worldwide view, but it's saying $1,000 a month in America is really borderline whether even that would be considered minimum sustenance. And so
depends on where you are, right?
Well, just because rent is so high, and but even food prices or commodity prices, but the major factor is, let's say, rent or possibly healthcare, the things that in other places.
Well, think about a cheap area like a household just made of people with just UBI. That's $24,000 a year, and in a cheap area, that's already pretty damn. That's quite a lot of money. It goes really far in, especially considering that they don't have to work at all for it. Right, I think that's quite a lot. It's nothing in our cities.
If you're putting it to the concept of a guaranteed basic sustenance, and you're just saying, well, what is a basic sustenance in America versus another country, and you say basically it's $1,000 a month. That's minimum sustenance in America, and one of the factors is rent is going to be like half of that money. So if you get a basic income in some parts of rural India and it's like $2 a day, as we're in America it's $1,000. I mean, $2 a day would be like $50 a month, let's say, as opposed to $1,000 a month. But it's unclear that people would move just because it's so much more, because it's just a factor of the living conditions in America that is the quality of life really substantially that higher, or just the technological differences in the living conditions?
I think it's really hard to know, but one thing that you have to keep in mind is there's
so much so that people would try to adapt their life, because it's not like, oh, you could just come to America. If you live in a place where you get like $2 a day and then it's up to $20 a day, but when you enter a different culture, because the $20 that maybe you could have done all these things in Africa or India, you may not be able to do those same things in in America. And say like, and you have certain things that you're going to have to do, and they're going to be extremely expensive. Where it's like, okay, if you were extremely poverty in a poor country, you couldn't imagine paying $500 a month rent or something like that. But you came to America, it just might be a necessity of living that like you're paying $500 or $500.
So, David, do you support Andrew Yang for president?
I'm not sure. I don't support anybody. I think it's a rigged system where I don't want any of those people. But I support ideas, and I'm more a globalist, so I think like you need some sort of a global like like our favorite Jonathan Sachs, singing the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN, and you're looking at a global eradication of poverty. And if you wanted to kind of put this universal brotherhood of man, guarantee on minimum sustenance, you would need a global universal basic income. And so I could see that likely for like some sort of messianic vision, how it becomes applied. Does the U.S. or who's likely to do it? And there's been studies on it saying like what countries are the most likely to adapt it first. But yeah, I think eventually you're going to have some sort of global universal basic income. And according to Jeffrey Sachs and the Sustainable Development Goals, those are coming by like 2025 when they want some of those goals met.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, look, I've met Jeffrey Sachs, okay? He's clueless about a number of things.
Yeah, Fletcher, it's ridiculous.
The NYU economist, William
Groyper
Easterly,
menace.
the Kenyan economist,
Now the
Biso
Groypers are
Morio,
booing
a
Trump's
few other
son.
people I know
Very
that actually are from Africa that have actually like ran farms said that, Nina Monk's book.
Groyper's going to groyp.
Jeffrey Sachs's ideas in the Millennium Village Project, which tried to model this ending poverty thing at the ground level, they pretty much
I
were
want
all
too much connected to his personality, but it's saying these sustainable development goals have been ratified by multiple international organizations, and many governments are technically legally binded to try to meet these goals.
But these goals can be missed, like the carbon goals are missed all the time, and nobody really remarks much upon it.
And the Millennium Development Goals fell completely flat because they're originally supposed to be met by 2015. So now let's just move it to 2025. Give me a break. Like Sachs's own Millennium Villages project, where he tried to show like how sustainable development to get people out of poverty would work, were a colossal failure.
Well, it's 2016, the backfire of Bernie Sanders, when Bernie Sanders and Jeffrey Sachs, if people remember, when Bernie Sanders was before the New York primary, he took a few days off to go to the Vatican for a council, and he had went together with Jeffrey Sachs, although a Jew, is a practicing Catholic. He converted to Catholicism. But if people remember, Bernie Sanders and Jeffrey Sachs traveled to the Vatican together right before the New York primary with Hillary Clinton, that he ended up losing to Hillary. And it was a big deal because I think New York was like an all or nothing state in terms of the delegates. But these ideas have been around a while. If it's like AOC in the New Green Deal, and they're going to keep on popping up. You could say, okay, you could degenerate any of the leading figures like Jeffrey Sachs, or maybe even like Bernie Sanders doesn't really talk about too much of the sustainable development goals because he's not an open globalist like Jeffrey Sachs is. But yeah, I mean, I think these ideas are going to get more and more popular, and you're going to see as people think about these things, you're going to see like you need global answers, and universal
I want to see how long
basic
it takes people
income
to
is
notice
one
in
of
the
these
chat.
things that you'll probably have to be implemented at a local level, but it has to be a global program.
Okay, we got to keep in mind though. I mean, with Jeffrey Sachs, we have a long record of
Jeffrey Sachs can't eradicate poverty. The Sustainable Development Goals state poverty was supposed to be eradicated in 2015, and poverty still hasn't been eradicated. And you're going to blame it on Jeffrey Sachs, but I think that's
hold on. Let me make my point so you understand. I'm making a very nuanced criticism. I don't think Sachs is a bad person. I think Sachs actually cares. I've met the man. I don't think he's evil. I think he's deluded on certain things. Like I've also met, because I used to live in New York. I also met William Easterly, and I've watched seminars with both of them. William Easterly, Dmbiso Moyo, those kind of people were right. Sachs was wrong. We have a long history of Sachs in many different environments being an economic advisor. The advice he suggested to Bolivia failed. The advice he suggested to Poland failed. The advice he suggested to Russia failed. His Millennium Village projects failed. Eventually, his own projects failed by his own metrics for their success. Eventually, like, Jeff, you're a nice guy. Maybe you got to think about your model of the world a little bit.
I think that nationalism versus globalism is an interesting place to take the conversation. Like, I think that people don't understand the value of compartmentalization, and they talk a lot about economies of scale, but they don't understand that there's a downside to scale as well. And so, like, you can get really, really far by isolating different sectors and letting people own their own crap. Like, when you make these huge intergovernmental organizations, they have terrible feedback. When people have to own the entire results of their actions, good or bad, they do much better. So I think that, like, there's this hunger for scale and for, like, oh, we want everything to be bigger and more global and more involved. And I think it's just like we should focus on smaller scale things, on smaller scale authority that has direct feedback where you can see what you're doing and if it's good or bad where you are. And that's why I support the nation, and then beyond that, the state and the town and the family. And I think that this notion of just, oh, we want global action, I think it's ludicrous. I don't think it makes sense. I think that we've seen the downsides of scale far more than the upsides right now.
One person to read is James C. Scott. He was an anthropologist who wrote a lot about peasant agriculture in Southeast Asia. He wrote a book, I think in the 1980s, called Seeing Like a State, Why Large State Programs, and this would also apply at,
but Kane, there's a downside to specialization as well.
Solutions often fail. It's because, like, they see everything in terms of, like, one kind of algorithm because they need to expend power in just the right way to organize just their own legitimacy. So they miss all these feedbacks Kyle is talking about. The state the state, when you use it, it's like it becomes like a. If you only have a hammer, every problem becomes a nail. And often, excessive state intervention that's all top down, that's utopian in basis, that's global, that doesn't have
global
feedback.
Doesn't mean top down. I'm saying when you're making straw men, and it's largely the environmental effects that has led to people realizing that the solution has to be global, but certainly economically, and it doesn't mean you need some, you think like Bitcoin or something, or decentralized solutions, the cloud, where you need a global solution to these problems. However, that doesn't mean that you need a series of elites. There's methods to have global responses, and there's method to preserve, like multicultural conservatism or something. There's methods to preserve local control to implement global solutions. And you're saying, okay, universal basic income is a pressing idea. It's interesting. It might be the futures for some societies or all societies. And you're talking about, what about migration? So you can't have universal basic income, so vastly different in different places, because it's just going to have so much incentive for people to migrate from places that don't have universal basic income or have a very small one. To say maybe there's a global solution, or you're saying the only solution will be a global solution. You will only have universal basic income that works when you have global universal basic income. And then you could just hypothesize about the various methods that might come to fruition.
Well, I mean, from a Duvidic multiple truth hypothesis perspective, that is possible. I don't think I was attacking a straw man, because piggybacking on Kyle here, all the elites that talk about global solutions always talk about global top-down governance, and they're not interested or unaware of the feedback problems. Like, I don't sense people having those conversations, therefore I'm not trusting.
Yeah, I'm saying if you're just warning about the elites,
motivations.
Or we need to mention names of people who are heading the field. So I mentioned Jeffrey Sachs because he's, the head of the Sustainable Development Goals organization. But I think that's just a name and a face of the larger movement, and at least the concepts of the law behind that's been ratified by so many different nations, or the concept of their main pillars of education and environmental protection and eradication of poverty. And you're looking for some sort of solution economically, your sustainability, and it has to be some sort of global universal basic income. And you're saying, well, how that's not practical. What body would administer such a thing? How's that even conceivable? Just saying, well, I don't know, but that's the direction that we're moving, and the more we talk about it, the more that we cooperate, and could be, like the elites, if you just get in front of it, so the elites that see it coming, they want to remain being elites, are going to try to get in front of it. And even bring that back to like Josh Neal, if he owns himself and he's like, he's going to get in front of it with his real identity, he could possibly become a major streamer, saying like, okay, what was holding him up was he wasn't using his real identity, but he's just going to get in front of it. Like, fuck it, it's out. Everyone knows who he is. He thinks it's happening, and he's just going to be the person that gets in front of the momentum. And the elites, if they go against the momentum, they risk losing their status and position and possessions. So their only choice is really to go with the momentum.
Yeah, but then we result in a kind of global society that gets into drift and inertia, and that's what I worry about. I mean, in my own experience,
we're also seeing a trend towards
nationalism. In New York. A lot of connections in New York. I met a lot of people on all sides of these development debates
like
back when things like the Millennium Villages Project, the Millennium Development Goals, the climate targets were all really big issues in the public consciousness.
Agreed.
And I would talk
under Obama.
Under Obama, I would talk about problems in the worldview with these people. I'd get blank stares, or people looked at me like I was Satan. When I would say, well, why don't we relook at like maybe some of the more Malthusian points of view, that there's some problems with like Paul Ehrlich and his extreme Malthusianism and those kinds of things. I mean, you don't want to go all the way that way, but the limits to growth model was important. I mean, we can't grow the world population forever. There are limits to how much pollution can exist in the environment. There's limits to how many high grade ores and fossil fuels we can extract, even if we improve our technology. There are limits to all of these things. Planet Earth is not infinite. So we need to look at how we are going to regulate these resources. Just giving everyone universal basic income will result in more drift, just so Jeff Bezos can sell everyone Amazon trinkets. This is not a way to run a global society. I could give a shit about Jeff Bezos's wealth if like large countries are suffering because universal basic income prevents them from developing, say, a farming sector. One of the big problems with aid to Africa is, I have all this free food dumped upon a country that just had a famine. The free food feeds the people. The people depend on the free food, and you can't get the farmers back on their feet. This has happened over and over again in Africa, and all it does is, as Halsey and TFM always say, it empowers warlords to increasingly monopolize the economy rather than develop smallholder agriculture, which is the first step in development that a lot of African countries haven't done well in. An exception might be Malawi, for instance, because they were fanatical about it. Cote d'Ivoire, under kind of a conservative military dictator, did a good job on this for a while. Most other African countries have done a terrible job. And the countries
just to keep it on point, without you giving us a tour of world politics, you're saying you're agreeing to the fundamental tenet that the solution has to be global. So if that's the case, why not just be a globalist?
Well, but I don't want to globally manage populations that need to figure out and have their own buy-in first. I'd rather have buy-in voluntarily from the bottom up rather than I'm the guy, raining money on all these people.
Well, that's just a method of globalism. So it's okay, financial globalism, usury or the usurious, whoever the current elites that have the most power in the most directions. If you look, okay, the Bilderberg meeting and Peter Thiel or whatever group of cronies that you think is the most influential in harnessing and directing this momentum, doesn't change the fact that the ideas are what's important, that the elites only have so much power to harness and control these larger forces. And generally, the markets here, the trend is your friend. You can't fight the market. You just have to be on you have to be on the right side of it. And if you want the market to be one way or the other, and you try to fight it, you're going to lose. Saying no matter how deep your pockets are, if the market's bull and you're shorting, you will go bankrupt at some point. You can't. There's no way to have deep enough pockets to fight the market. And so that globalism sense where you're just looking, well, what you're
Fletcher,
just
we talked a bit about it, but there wasn't much to see. If you have any better audio, that'd be great.
For the
but we don't have great audio on that, or great video on that.
You should be
most recent groyping.
You're having
groypening.
The name globalists. You're saying, well, George Soros or your various people, Jeffrey Sachs, were so much more successful at pushing the global agenda than anybody else that they basically got a monopoly on the term globalism and globalist. That if you consider yourself a globalist, like you're just going to be under George Soros. He's just going to be able to out-invest you and write a bigger check than you, and therefore exert bigger influence.
Yeah, but look at George Soros's record. It's a record of color revolutions which have failed, with Ukraine being the biggest failure. It's the Millennium Villages project hasn't worked according to its own metrics of success. The feedback systems aren't very strong. A lot of political and social chaos in the wake of utopian projects. I care about the globe, but I wouldn't consider myself a globalist in any sense that they would recognize it. And also, I don't want to rule over the people of Malawi. I want them to have sovereignty and control over their own stuff. And that also means responsibility to develop their own economy as they see fit according to their own capabilities. And if they want my help after they've taken that first step, yeah, I'm open to it. But letting people take their own side first and then and play around with it to develop their own capabilities allows them to be a more effective stakeholder. And, the globalists now, the Sachs, the Soros type people, the Vatican, all these kind of institutions that are all in on this sustainable development stuff have never considered those questions. And in doing so, they actually cause a lot of damage to the people they purport to want to help, because they're so interested in healing the world, they're lost in the clouds. They aren't talking to the people on the ground.
I think Gandalf makes a great point here. I have to head out, folks. It was great talking to you, Jen. Great talking to you, Gandalf and Duvid. Love being on. May everyone prosper. May all axes be buried and buried deep. Good night, folks.
Thanks, Kyle. It was great to see you. We'll talk to you again soon.
All right, so that's that. I can now wrap up a little bit, but first I want to jump into chat with my chatters. I've been sadly neglecting my chat boys, my boys in the chat, there, right there. So I need to talk to you folks more. Gonna get ya. All right. Yeah, so here we are. Fletcher was saying some interesting stuff. What's my Fletcher boy saying? Fletcher was saying, if Nick gets to freely slander Jews, I'll slander him. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is that these folks are so aggressive and so hostile to Jews that they can hardly complain when things turn bad for them in terms of their relationship with these individuals. Their strategy is just absolutely hostile. And so if that's the game you're going to play, then you're going to get that two ways, right? And they don't seem to understand that, right? They don't understand the consequences of their actions. Kane Marco says, to me, it doesn't matter what the Groypers do as long as it screws over conservatives. I know, but Kane, you need to understand that ultimately conservatism is what will save you, okay? Take the hand of conservatism, okay? You need to take the hand of conservatism and understand that, the actual movement that you have is more important than your ideals. It's like someone who has a beat-up Hyundai, saying that I want a Ferrari and I'm not gonna tolerate this beaten-up beater car that has trouble shifting gears and clicks and clatters all the time. Well, you got to accept what you got, right? What you have got is what you have to deal with, and so you got to be practical. That's the end all be all, right? People who don't who aren't perfectionists are the people who get things done. Kane Marcos says, so you admit that conservatism is a shitty car? Hell yeah, brother. Conservatism is a real shitty car. It's a beater. It's beat to hell. The oil ain't been changed, and it needs a lot of help. Okay? For sure. But it's what you got. It's what you got, man. You got to deal with what you got. All right. If anyone wants to come on the Discord, we can have a discussion. I'm going to post the Discord link once again ad infinitum. Also, folks, subscribe. Subscribe, press the button. Press the bell, ring the bell. And I'm going to post the Discord link. But get in voice if you want to chat about the Groypers. Fletcher, if you want to chat for a little while about the Groypers, I invite you to come on the Discord. Could be a little bit of fun, but otherwise I pretty much have to leave with that. Let's see if there's anything new on Twitter. Let's get that dopamine hit. Twitter boys. Twitter. Kane Marco says, we'd be better off doing leftism, honestly. Well, then what's your goal, Kane Marco? What's your goal? Right, I'm not surprised you think that. Exactly. That's the thing, is that these folks who hate conservatism are often closet lefties. But they accuse everyone else of being closet lefties. That's their game, you know. Grabbo. You know, they'll often say, like, oh, well, I think that Spencer did that recently, like, right? Like, Richard B. Spencer, he recently said something like, I support, not going to link to his Twitter. Okay. Richard B. Spencer recently said, like, I believe that Bernie Sanders is a candidate or Warren is a candidate because they're going to provide relief for ailing white families. And it's like, well, yeah, you're basically a leftist who wants to be all, all freaking edgy. That's your position, right? Nothing really separates you from the left. Yep. Kane Marco says, because leftists play to win. Well, people who are in the middle play to win. People who are on the fringes play to lose. I recently made a point like that. What's going on here? A lot of Nick Fuentes hate being retweeted by the old Fletcher. What's going on here?
Yo, Kyle, what's up?
Hey, Mike. Good to see you. Good to see you, mate.
Sorry, I don't know what happened. I was on Jen's stream. I tried to order a pizza. It wasn't working. And then I don't know what happened. But whatever. I'm here.
Good to have the bros back. We had a window capture for Discord. There we go. Great. And we can
But I think the highlight of the night wasn't the Groypers or Trump Jr. It was Rodney coming on stream, right?
Oh, hell yeah.
Kind of a surprise.
I was missing Rodney. I wasn't expecting to see him anymore. But yeah, that was heartening. Yeah, I think that like the recent Groyper thing is big, and I liked Rodney's take on it. I was kind of surprised, but I guess not. It sort of fit in with his earlier takes as well. Yeah. What do you think about the whole Groyper invasion?
Oh, I don't know. I liked it. It's something that you would never care about, right? Like you would never show Kirk's Q&A or even Trump Jr. Nobody would care. But because of the Groypers, you actually kind of cared, right? But then the counteraction to what they were doing is just to not do Q&A, which is kind of lame, I guess, but it just shows how easy it is to shut them down, right?
Yeah, well, and what they were doing previously was putting them in the front of the line. So they kind of went from one extreme to the other. The first extreme was, we're going to put everyone who disagrees with us right in front of the line, and then they went from that to no Q&A at all, right? And I think that the no Q&A at all related to the fact that it was Donald Trump Jr.'s night, and they didn't want to taint Donald Trump Jr. with any weirdness, you know? Yeah. I think that explains a lot of it.
So I said, if Fuentes, he can do a tour like anyone else. Let him go around the country, do his own thing.
Right.
I think he's been piggyback. I mean, go ahead.
I think he's worried about falling into the Spencer trap in that regard, right?
Yeah, but I mean, if you're familiar with Roosh V, who's kind of like a outcasted, kind of like a former PUA /
Yeah, I know Roosh.
Yeah, you know Roosh. So he's, I mean, yeah, not everyone agrees with Roosh, but you can appreciate his perseverance in the face of people trying to silence him. So he recently went around the country and did his own tour. And I don't know what kind of numbers he drew or how much money he made, but he did it. So if he wanted to do it, he could do it in a way or another,
Yeah, I agree. The main reason why I don't sympathize that much is similar to Fletcher's, which is just like he seems to embrace dirty tactics, like implicitly or even explicitly, like I'm here to ruin these people's reputations. And if you do that, then, well, that's a dirty tactic. You're not playing on the up and up, and at that point, you can't complain when other people try to silence you in a way that's underhanded, so to speak. At that point, it's not even underhanded, in my opinion, because you have to start from good faith for you to be betrayed. If you're starting out just as a usurper, as someone who's trying to hurt and demean other people, then you're not entitled to any sort of rules of war from those people, in my view.
Well, I agree. I recognize these arguments. Before I got involved in the alt-right, like about a year ago, I was arguing with SJWs, which is a waste of time, but you get something out of it. It's either they try to detract from what you are. You're a white male. You're an oppressor.
I want to get some SJWs in the stream, honestly. Like, I want to argue with them. I think that I don't get enough of that. Like, I just argue with people on the far right. I think it would be really productive for me to actually have a conversation on stream with more of the lefty side of things.
Actually, I agree. But at the end of the day, they're playing the same game. Oh, you're trying to silence us. Oh, you're oppressing us. You're not letting us speak. And then, but when you're on the opposite side, it's like, oh, you oppressed us for so long, but now you're trying to speak up. Kind of this funny game, which I always wanted to draw an intelligent diagram of the thing I'm talking about. I just haven't been able to figure it out just yet. But I think you'd be familiar with what I'm talking about.
Right. Let me just read a Twitter exchange that I had, or not exchange. I just literally just said it. Ben Sixsmith was talking about how horseshoe theory is impoverished. He was criticizing the approach that Ben Shapiro had towards the Groypers and towards Nick Fuentes. And he says, we need to get rid of this horseshoe theory crap because it's impoverishing our understanding of these political dynamics. And I said, I disagree strongly. Take two homeless people masturbating with sandpaper. One says they want to go to Mars. Other says they want to feel what Jesus felt. It would be insane to emphasize the different stated goals over the similar behavior. Same for the far left and the far right. Both are hilariously impractical. Both try to obviate their failures by getting rid of their individual identity, and both do this using the category of race as the primary obfuscating tool. Often it is even the same people flitting between the camps, going back and forth. Both regard normal people with over-the-top jealous rage. Yet Mr. Shapiro, I quote, and his colleagues have commonalities with the left as well. Does this mean that the mainstream conservatives and the left have an alliance? And I said, yes, absolutely. They are united against and conspire against radicals. Both the mainstream right and left will mercilessly use and discard idiot loonies on the fringe. The idiot loonies are very angry about this, but being idiots, it doesn't matter. If they ever channel their rage in a seriously inconvenient way, they get bopped. And that's where the matter stands. And once you understand that, you avoid the idiot fringe, and you start to understand that the game is understanding power and these dynamics and how you can build a productive relationship with mentally healthy people. And if you're in the area of mentally ill people, then you're in the area of the disposable. If you want to be disposable, then that's great, but most people don't. Any thoughts on that?
I got you.
Yeah.
Oh, damn, that was a lot. You got to pay more for high IQ guests, I guess. But I don't know. Do you have an opinion on Trump Jr.? I went to the rally in Texas and Houston. They had the other Trump brother, but I mean, they kind of show up as a formality. They give a little intro speech. But I actually was front row for the Trump rally in Houston, which was about a year ago in October, which is interesting.
Right.
The police enforcement, they ferreted out any dissenters. I mean, it's Texas, so it's not California or something. But, yeah, I don't know. Sorry, I'm not really contributing to the point you're trying to make.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, I hope that basically we can move towards an understanding of the pathologies of both sides, and I'm liking horseshoe theory a lot more than I used to. I used to be very dismissive of it, but I just noticed too much of people who say things like, well, I love the I'd be on the left if it weren't for the race thing, basically, right? And it's like, okay, so your philosophy entirely lines up with the left, except that the left is not edgy enough for you, and you really want to be able to demean people like in a more serious way. Okay, I got it, right? And I just see too much of that. Fletcher says they're harassment. Go ahead.
I was going to say, when I first heard the horseshoe theory, I thought it was the same thing as the bagel theory. I guess it's not, but you're familiar with that too, which is like, no matter what a Jew says, they're advocating for their own. Basically.
I did not hear of the bagel theory, but I've heard, of course, of that more general notion quite a lot. Yeah.
Right. Which is basically, I mean, I can understand it to a certain extent, I guess. Whether you're a right-wing Jew like Wolfowitz, or a left-wing, well, there's plenty of fucking crazy left-wing Jews, so we don't have to mention any names. But you're still advocating the same, ideology. That's the bagel theory, basically.
Yeah, and you can have that perspective, but at that point, it becomes unreasonable for you to expect cooperation from the people you're demeaning in that way, and that's the thing, is that they don't expect it, but they're just they cry these crocodile tears about how they're being excluded, but they understand the game, and the game for them is, well, we're gonna get them, we're gonna get these Jews, and well, at that point you're gonna get hostility, right? Such is life.
I mean, I think we're all disappointed tonight because there's no footage.
Yeah. I really wanted to do a response stream like I did to the earlier. Well, there's footage, but it's so brief. Like, there was a little bit of booing, and then the Q&A thing, it just was no Q&A. I would have liked to see more back and forth. But of course, Ben Shapiro was a bust in that regard as well, right? Because there were no Groypers in the Q&A line that people could get to.
Meanwhile, you and Halsey are here, ready for debate.
Hell yeah!
For Q&A.
Anytime, bros. Groyps can come on anytime and try their luck with the debate stage, bros.
No insult to you guys. You just don't have enough followers for what these Groypers are looking for.
Yeah, I need a network. Maybe I should outsource my networking to some.
It's like
some third or fourth parties. Yeah, people.
I think they need to read, Sun Tzu Art of War to understand what good strategy and what your rival is thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Why would you're Nick Fuentes, say 50,000 approximately followers, and you're Ben Shapiro and you have whatever 2 million?
Yeah, everyone understands that dynamic. People want clout by going after bigger folks. So yeah, that's a big part of the whole streaming dynamic. But yeah, you need to play the game, and I need to start playing the game if I want to go anywhere. I need to start, networking, getting more debates, and that's where the lefties come in. I think, is that ultimately you're not going to have a future just swimming in the same pool. But I do enjoy, my little community that's built up over these past few weeks.
I agree. My MO is just to speak my mind. Not that your chat is strictly right-wing Jews, but much of it. It's not a big market. You can get a lot more followers being a Nazi, but obviously I'm not going to do that.
Are you interested in building your own following as well, Mike?
Not really.
No.
I'm more interested in expressing myself, and then piggybacking on the back of other people like yourself or Halsey.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
No, not at all. Of course not. And I was doing that with Luke earlier as well, basically. Right? It's the same thing. Anyway, but yeah, I gotta head out, folks. It was a good little stream. Unfortunately, there were not a lot of fireworks, but we did get to talk to COE, got to talk to Duvid and Gandalf and Rodney. Best of all, Rodney returns. So good night, folks. It was good talking to y'all. And I agree, Fletcher. Listen to this man. Listen to this message right here. Like, follow, and subscribe, boys. Kyle out.